Rain hammered the cobblestones like nails into a coffin. Elara Whitcombe stood at the altar, staring at the man who'd just become her husband, a stranger with eyes like winter fog and a reputation that made grown men cross themselves. Duke Rowan Ashford hadn't smiled once during the vows. Hadn't looked at her, really. Just signed the papers with the mechanical precision of a man closing a business deal. Behind her, she could hear her mother's quiet sob of relief. The creditors would be paid. The family name would survive. And Elara? She'd just traded her future for theirs. But here's the thing about bargains made in desperation: they never stay clean. What Elara didn't know, standing there in her borrowed wedding dress, was that she'd just married into a house where silence was currency and secrets grew like mold in the walls. A place where two little girls learned early that loving anyone meant losing them, where servants whispered prayers and avoided the third-floor corridor after dark. If you're watching this from Boston, Miami, Seattle, or anywhere in between, stick with me. Because this isn't just a story about a cold marriage. It's about what happens when someone refuses to freeze. When a woman with nothing left to lose decides that survival isn't enough. Hit that like button if you're ready for a story where the monster might not be who you think. And drop a comment with your city so I know who's watching. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this one ends. The carriage ride to Ashford Manor took 3 hours, and Rowan Ashford didn't speak for 2 hours and 53 minutes of it. Elara counted. She sat across from him in the plush interior, her wedding dress already rumpled from the rain, watching her new husband stare out the window like she wasn't even there. His profile could have been carved from granite, sharp jawline, nose that had been broken at least once, scar threading through his left eyebrow. Everything about him screamed dangerous, but in that controlled, leashed way that made you wonder what would happen if the chain ever snapped. "The weather's turning," she tried once, just to break the suffocating quiet. Nothing. Not even a flicker of acknowledgement. She tried again. "My mother says autumn comes early this far north." Still nothing. Elara folded her hands in her lap and made herself count to 10, then 20, then 50. Her father had warned her, "The Duke doesn't do pleasantries, sweetheart. Keep your head down, bear him an heir, and you'll have everything you need." Her mother had been more direct. Smile, agree, and for heaven's sake, don't ask questions. Well, Elara had never been particularly good at following instructions. "Are you going to speak to me at all?" she asked. "Or is this the preview for the next 40 years? That got his attention. Rowan's gaze slid from the window to her face, and Elara felt the weight of it like a physical thing. His eyes were gray, not soft gray, not romantic storybook gray, but the color of steel fresh from the forge. "What would you like me to say?" His voice was low, textured with something that might have been exhaustion or might have been contempt. Hard to tell. "Literally anything. Hello, wife would be a start. Welcome to your new prison would at least be honest." A muscle in his jaw ticked. "You signed the contract." "My father signed the contract. I just showed up and said the words." "Same result." "Is it?" Elara leaned forward, and something reckless bloomed in her chest. The same thing that used to get her in trouble as a child, the thing that made her climb trees too high and ask questions too loud. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I sold myself to save my family, and you bought yourself what exactly? A decorative wife? Someone to warm your bed twice a year and stay invisible the rest of the time?" Rowan's expression didn't change, but she saw something flicker in those iron eyes. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. "You want honesty?" He shifted, and suddenly the space between them felt smaller. "Fine. I needed a wife because society demands it. You needed money because your father gambled away everything but his pride. We both got what we required. That's the arrangement." Required. Elara tasted the word, bitter as ash. Not wanted, not chosen. Required. Exactly. Well, she sat back, smoothing her skirts with hands that wanted to tremble but wouldn't. At least we're clear. Crystal. The silence that fell after that wasn't comfortable, but it was different, charged with something that might have been respect or might have been the first notes of a war. Neither of them had the energy to fight yet. When they finally arrived at Ashford Manor, the sun was setting behind clouds the color of old bruises. The house rose from the moorland like something from a Gothic nightmare, all dark stone and narrow windows, surrounded by iron gates that looked more like they were meant to keep things in than keep things out. The staff lined up in the entrance hall, 15 people arranged by rank and function. Elara recognized the formations from her mother's etiquette lessons: butler, housekeeper, lady's maid, footman, kitchen staff. They all wore the same expression, carefully blank, eyes forward, mouths in neutral lines that gave away nothing. "Your Grace!" An older woman with steel-gray hair stepped forward and curtsied so precisely it could have been measured with a ruler. "Welcome home. And to you, Your Grace." This to Elara, with a nod that felt more like an assessment. "Welcome to Ashford Manor." "Mrs. Brennan runs the household," Rowan said, already moving toward the stairs. "She'll show you to your rooms. Dinner's at 8. Don't be late." And just like that, he was gone. Up the stairs 2 at a time, boots echoing on marble, until a door slammed somewhere in the upper reaches of the house. Elara stood in the entrance hall, still in her damp wedding dress, and stared at the spot where her husband had disappeared. "Well," she said to no one in particular, "that was romantic." Mrs. Brennan's mouth twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. "If you'll follow me, Your Grace, I'll show you to the Duchess's chambers." The chambers turned out to be a suite of rooms on the second floor: bedroom, sitting room, dressing room, and a bathroom that would have been magnificent if it wasn't so aggressively impersonal. Everything was expensive and nothing was warm. Silk wallpaper in pale blue, mahogany furniture polished to a mirror shine, windows that looked out over gardens too formal to ever be called pretty. "The previous Duchess redecorated 10 years ago," Mrs. Brennan said, watching Elara take it all in. "If you'd like to make changes—" "The previous Duchess?" Elara turned from the window. "Rowan's first wife." "Yes, Your Grace." "What was she like?" Mrs. Brennan's face went even more carefully blank. "I couldn't say, Your Grace. Couldn't or won't. I've laid out evening clothes for dinner. Is there anything else you require?" It was a dismissal, polite but firm. Elara recognized the wall when she hit it. "No, thank you, Mrs. Brennan." The housekeeper curtsied and left, and Elara was finally, blessedly alone. She made it to the bed before the shaking started. Not crying, Elara Whitcombe had learned early that tears solved nothing and cost too much. But her hands trembled and her breath came short, and for a long moment she just sat there, 22 years old and married to a stranger, in a house that felt like it was holding its breath. "You can do this," she told herself. "You've done harder things." Except she hadn't, really. Oh, she'd survived her father's gambling losses and her mother's tears and the slow creep of poverty that ate everything but appearances. She'd smiled through it, made jokes, pretended it didn't hurt when friends stopped calling and invitations dried up. But this? This was different. This was survival of a different kind. A knock on the door made her straighten. "Come in." A young woman entered, maybe 18, with dark hair and suspicious eyes. "I'm Mary, Your Grace, lady's maid. Mrs. Brennan sent me to help you dress for dinner." "Thank you." Elara stood, already reaching for the buttons at her back. "I can manage. Mrs. Brennan said I'm to help." Mary's tone suggested this wasn't negotiable. "It's my job, Your Grace." So Elara stood there while this girl, who barely looked at her, undid 40 tiny buttons and helped her out of the wedding dress and into something more appropriate for dinner. A green silk that would have been beautiful if Elara could have mustered the energy to care about beautiful. "How long have you worked here?" Elara asked, watching Mary's face in the mirror. 3 years, Your Grace." Do you like it?" Mary's hands paused. "It's employment, Your Grace." That wasn't an answer, but Elara filed it away with all the other non-answers she was collecting. Dinner was served in a dining room designed to seat 30, with Elara at one end of the table and Rowan at the other, a distance that required actual projection to be heard. Between them stretched an expanse of white linen, crystal, and enough silverware to stock a small shop. "This is ridiculous," Elara said, staring down the length at her husband. Rowan looked up from his soup. "Excuse me?" "I said this is ridiculous. We're a mile apart. We might as well be eating in different counties." "This is how dinner is served at Ashford Manor." "Well, it's stupid." Elara pushed back from the table, picked up her plate and silverware, and walked the length of the room to sit directly across from Rowan. There, much better. For a moment, she thought he might actually explode. His face did something complicated. Surprise, then anger, then something that might have been amusement before it all locked down again behind that iron control. The Duchess, he said carefully, traditionally sits at the foot of the table. The Duchess traditionally does a lot of things, I imagine. I'm not her. No. His gaze was sharp enough to cut. You're certainly not. They ate in silence for several minutes. Elara could feel the servants watching from the shadows. She saw one footman's eyes widen, caught the flash of something like terror on the face of the young man serving wine. Your staff is terrified of you, she observed. My staff is well trained. That's not the same thing. Isn't it? Rowan set down his fork with the precision of a man exercising significant restraint. Mrs. Whitcombe, it's Mrs. Ashford now. Or Your Grace, if you're feeling formal. Or Elara, if you want to pretend we're actually married. Elara. He bit off her name like it cost him. I understand that today has been difficult, that this arrangement isn't what you would have chosen. But there are rules in this house, structures. They exist for a reason. What reason? Order, predictability, peace. Elara laughed, and it came out sharper than she meant. Peace? Is that what you call this? Because it feels more like a mausoleum to me. Everyone tiptoeing around, afraid to breathe wrong, smiling with their mouths but not their eyes. That's not peace. That's fear dressed up in good manners. Rowan's jaw clenched. You've been here 3 hours. Long enough to see that something's very wrong. Nothing is wrong. Everything functions exactly as it should. Then why does it feel like everyone in this house is waiting for something terrible to happen? She'd pushed too far. She saw it in the way Rowan's face went absolutely still, in the way his hands gripped the table edge hard enough that his knuckles went white. You know nothing about this house, he said, voice low and dangerous. Nothing about what's required to keep it running. Nothing about... He stopped himself, took a breath that looked like it hurt. We're done here. I have work to attend to. Rowan... But he was already gone, striding from the dining room like something was chasing him, leaving Elara alone with cold soup and the wide eyes of servants who looked at her like she'd just lit a match in a room full of gunpowder. That night, Elara couldn't sleep. She tried. Lay in the enormous bed in her impersonal chambers and stared at the ceiling and counted sheep and thought calming thoughts. But her mind wouldn't settle, kept replaying the day's moments. Rowan's face at the altar, the silent carriage ride, the staff's careful blankness, dinner ending in what felt like barely controlled fury. Around midnight, she gave up and went exploring. Ashford Manor at night was different. Shadows pooled in corners where gaslight couldn't reach. The house creaked and settled like something alive, breathing. Elara wrapped a robe around herself and padded barefoot through corridors that all looked the same, turning randomly until she was thoroughly lost. That's when she heard it. Crying. A child, trying to stay quiet and failing. Elara followed the sound to a door left slightly ajar. Inside, illuminated by a single candle, a little girl sat hunched on her bed, face buried in her knees, shoulders shaking. Hey, Elara said softly from the doorway. Are you all right? The girl's head snapped up. She couldn't have been more than 8, with Rowan's gray eyes and dark hair falling in tangles around a face blotchy from crying. Who are you? The girl whispered. I'm Elara. I married your father today. You must be one of his daughters. Lydia. The girl stared at her with something between suspicion and desperate hope. You're the new Duchess. Apparently so, though I'm still figuring out what that means. Elara took a careful step into the room. What's wrong? Nothing. Lydia wiped her face with the back of her hand. I'm fine. You don't look fine. Miss Thornberry says crying is weak. She says proper young ladies control their emotions. Miss Thornberry sounds like she has a stick up her... Elara caught herself. Who's Miss Thornberry? Our governess. She says we have to be perfect or we'll shame father. She says mother wasn't perfect and look what happened to her. Elara felt something cold slide down her spine. What did happen to your mother? But Lydia just shook her head, mouth clamped shut, and Elara knew she'd hit another wall. All right, she said instead. No more questions. But for the record, Miss Thornberry is wrong. Crying doesn't make you weak. Sometimes it's the bravest thing you can do. Really? Really? And you know what else? Elara sat on the edge of the bed, slowly, giving Lydia time to pull away if she wanted. Sometimes when you can't sleep and everything feels too big, it helps to have someone sit with you, even if they don't say anything, even if they're basically a stranger. Want me to stay a while? Lydia considered this, gray eyes too old for her face. Then, very quietly, yes, please. So Elara sat there in the candlelight while Lydia curled back up under her blankets, and she hummed an old lullaby her own mother used to sing. And she watched this little girl who'd learned too young to cry quietly, and thought about how many things in this house needed to change. She was still sitting there when a voice spoke from the doorway, cold as midwinter. "What do you think you're doing?" Elara turned to find Rowan standing there in shirt sleeves, hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it, face carved from ice and fury. "Your daughter couldn't sleep," she said quietly. "She was crying. I heard her." "So you entered her room without permission?" "She's 8 years old and upset. I didn't think I needed permission to show basic human kindness. This is not your concern." Elara stood up carefully, aware of Lydia watching them both with wide eyes. "She's my stepdaughter now. That makes her my concern. You married me yesterday. You don't get to play mother." "I'm not playing anything." Elara kept her voice level with effort. "I heard a child crying and I responded. That's called being a decent person. It's called interfering." Rowan stepped into the room, and somehow he seemed to fill it, all that barely controlled intensity focused like a weapon. "Lydia has a governess. Miss Thornberry handles her care and education. You will not disrupt the established routine." "The established routine," Elara repeated slowly, "that teaches 8-year-olds that crying is shameful? The routine that teaches discipline and self-control, essential qualities for young women of her station. She's not a soldier, she's a little girl. She's a duke's daughter, there's a difference." They stared at each other across Lydia's bedroom, and Elara felt something shift in her chest, that reckless thing that made her climb too high and ask too loud, waking up properly now. "Leave," Rowan said, voice dropping to something that might have been a threat or might have been a plea. "Now." "Fine." Elara moved toward the door, then paused. "But just so we're clear, I signed a contract to marry you. I agreed to be your wife, live in your house, follow your rules within reason. But I did not agree to stand by while children cry themselves to sleep because showing emotion is forbidden. That's not in any contract, and it's not something I'm capable of ignoring." "You'll learn." "No," Elara said, meeting those iron eyes directly. "I won't." The next morning, Elara met the other daughter. Breakfast was served in a smaller dining room, still formal, still full of rules, but at least you could see the person across the table without binoculars. Rowan was already gone, Mrs. Brennan explained. He took breakfast early and spent mornings in his study, handling estate business. "Of course he does," Elara muttered, staring at her tea. "The young ladies will be joining you shortly," Mrs. Brennan continued, unruffled. "Miss Thornberry supervises their morning routine, but they take breakfast with the Duchess. With you, Your Grace. Before, they ate in the nursery, but His Grace felt it appropriate that they practice proper table manners. Another rule. Another structure. Another way to make sure nothing unexpected ever happened. The door opened and 2 girls filed in, followed by a woman who looked exactly like what you'd get if you asked a factory to produce the platonic ideal of a governess. Severe gray dress, hair scraped back into a bun tight enough to cause headaches. Expression that suggested she'd never smiled in her life and wasn't about to start now. "Your Grace," the woman curtsied precisely. "I am Miss Thornberry. These are Lady Lydia and Lady Catherine." Lydia, the girl from last night, stood beside her sister with her eyes fixed on the floor. The other girl, Catherine, looked about 12 and had mastered the art of appearing invisible while technically being present. "Good morning," Elara said, watching them. "Please sit." They sat with synchronized precision, hands folded, backs straight, like dolls arranged at a tea party. "Miss Thornberry," Elara continued, "will you be joining us?" "I supervise from the adjoining room, Your Grace. The young ladies will inform me if any correction is required." "Correction for what?" "Improper behavior, slouching, Speaking out of turn, the use of incorrect utensils. Miss Thornbury smiled, and it was the least warm thing Elara had ever seen. His Grace is most particular about proper conduct. I see. Elara poured herself tea with a hand that wanted to shake. Well, thank you, Miss Thornbury. We'll manage from here. The governess hesitated, clearly torn between following the dismissal and her obvious belief that leaving these girls unsupervised would result in immediate chaos. We'll be fine, Elara said firmly. Miss Thornbury curtsied again and withdrew, but Elara could see her shadow through the glass panel in the adjoining door. Watching. Always watching. For several minutes, they ate in silence. The girls moved like they were being graded. Careful bites, napkins dabbed precisely, eyes never quite meeting Elara's. So, Elara finally said, I'm terrible at formal breakfast. Fair warning. Lydia's eyes flickered up, then down. Catherine remained frozen. I also talk too much, ask inappropriate questions, and have this unfortunate habit of saying exactly what I'm thinking. My mother despairs of me. Well, she did. Now she's just relieved I'm not her problem anymore. Nothing. These girls had been trained too well. All right, Elara set down her fork. New rule. When it's just us, no Miss Thornbury, no servants, no one else, you can talk. About anything, in any way you want. No corrections, no judgment. This is your safe space. Deal? Lydia looked at Catherine. Catherine looked at the wall. Neither spoke. I understand, Elara said quietly. Trust is earned, not demanded, but the offer stands, always. They finished breakfast in that careful silence, and when Miss Thornbury came to collect them for lessons, Elara watched them file out like soldiers returning to duty. That afternoon, Elara went looking for her husband. She found him eventually in a study that looked like a general's war room, maps on the walls, paper stacked in precise columns, everything organized with military efficiency. Rowan sat behind a desk that could have doubled as a defensive fortification, reading something that made his jaw clench. We need to talk, Elara announced from the doorway. I'm working. I don't care. We need to talk about your daughters. They're fine. They're terrified. Elara stepped into the room uninvited. They eat like they're being tested. They speak like they're under interrogation. They move like prisoners on parole. That's not fine. That's enough. Rowan stood, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. You've been here 1 day. 1. And you think you understand my family? My children? What they need? I understand what I see. You see what you want to see. A tragic situation you can fix. Children in need of rescue. A cold man who needs warming. It's a nice story, very romantic, but it's not reality. Then what is reality? Reality is that I've kept this family together for 7 years. Through scandal and loss and every kind of hell you can't imagine. I've provided for them, protected them, ensured they have everything they need to become respectable women who can marry well and have good lives. That's what a father does. A father, Elara said, also shows up, talks to them, lets them know they're loved for who they are, not just how perfect they can perform. Rowan's face did that thing again, a flash of something raw and wounded before the iron walls slammed back up. You know nothing about being a father, or a mother. You're a girl playing house, and I don't have time for games. It hit harder than it should have. Elara felt the words land like punches, felt her face heat and her eyes sting, and hated herself for both reactions. You're right, she said, voice rough. I don't know anything about being a parent. I don't know anything about running an estate or managing servants or whatever the hell else I'm supposed to do here, but I know what it looks like when people are hurting, and those girls are hurting, and so are you. Get out. Rowan, get out. So she did, because what else was there to do? She walked out of that study with her pride in tatters and her throat tight, and she made it all the way back to her chambers before the shaking started again. This was a mistake, she thought, staring at her reflection in the vanity mirror, coming here, marrying him, thinking I could make any difference at all. But then she thought about Lydia's tear-stained face, Catherine's careful invisibility, the way every single person in this house moved like they were walking on glass, and that reckless thing in her chest said, no, not yet, not until you know why. That evening, Elara requested dinner be served in her chambers. Mrs. Brennan raised an eyebrow but didn't comment, just had a tray sent up with enough food for 3 people. Elara ate about 4 bites, then pushed the tray away and started going through the Duchess's rooms properly. Not snooping exactly, just investigating. The closets were full of clothes that had been expensive once, silk and velvet and fine wool, but were now slightly outdated, carefully preserved, but not loved. The jewelry box held pieces that spoke of old money and older taste. The writing desk was empty except for blank stationery embossed with a family crest. In the bottom drawer, under a stack of handkerchiefs, Elara found a leather journal. Her mother would have told her not to read it. Her father would have said privacy was sacred. Every rule of polite society screamed that this was wrong. Elara opened it anyway. The handwriting was elegant, controlled, each letter formed with care. The first entry was dated 9 years ago. Today I became the Duchess of Ashford. Rowan is everything I hoped. Strong, capable, a man of conviction. I am the luckiest woman alive. Elara flipped forward. The entries became less frequent, more stilted. Rowan works so much. I know the estate demands it, but sometimes I feel like I'm married to a ghost. Lydia asked why Papa doesn't play with her. I didn't know what to say. Mrs. Brennan suggested I not interfere with household management. Apparently the previous Duchess tried to change things, and it caused problems. Further still, something is wrong. Rowan comes home late, says nothing about where he's been. Today I saw his hands, bruised, scraped, like he'd been in a fight. When I asked, he said I wouldn't understand. Maybe he's right. Maybe I'm not strong enough for this. I found letters. Not addressed to me. Unsigned. They speak of meetings, of danger, of things that could destroy everything we've built. I confronted Rowan. He said it was a state business. He looked at me like I was the enemy. The last entry made Elara's breath catch. I can't stay. I won't let my daughters grow up in this house, in this cold marriage, wondering if their father is a good man or something else entirely. Tomorrow I'm taking them to my sister's. I'm leaving him. Maybe that makes me weak. Maybe it makes me free. The date was 7 years ago. Elara sat there holding a dead woman's journal, and pieces started clicking together like bones in a skeleton. The first Duchess had left. Or tried to. And something had happened. Something that ended with her dead and Rowan wearing grief like armor. A knock on the door made her jump. Your Grace? Mrs. Brennan's voice, carefully neutral. His Grace requests your presence in the drawing room. Elara hid the journal and went downstairs. Rowan stood by the fireplace, still in his work clothes, face unreadable. But his hands were shaking, just slightly, barely visible. But there. I owe you an apology, he said without preamble. This afternoon, I was harsh. You were honest. I was cruel. There's a difference. He turned to face her properly. You're right about my daughters. They're not happy. I know that. But I don't know how to fix it without risking everything again. Risking what? Doesn't matter. He rubbed a hand over his face, and for a moment he looked exhausted, bone deep, soul weary. Look, I need you to understand something. This house, these rules, this structure, it's not because I enjoy being a tyrant. It's because 7 years ago, everything fell apart, spectacularly. And when I put it back together, I swore I'd never let chaos in again. Order, control, predictability. Those are the things that keep disasters from happening. Or, Elara said carefully, they're the things that keep you from having to feel anything. Rowan's jaw clenched. You think I don't feel? You think I don't see what my daughters have become? What this house is like? Then why not change it? Because I tried that once. His voice cracked, just barely. I tried being different, being open, trusting, and it got someone killed. There it was, the wound beneath the iron. Your wife, Elara said. My wife. What happened? Nothing you need to know about. The walls were slamming back up, brick by brick. The point is, I'll try. With the girls, with this. He gestured between them, whatever this was. But slowly. And you have to work with me, not against me. Can you do that? Elara thought about the journal upstairs. about Lydia's tears and Catherine's silence, and the way everyone in this house moved like they were afraid the floor might open up beneath them. "I can try," she said. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't even really a truce. But it was something. And that night, when Elara lay in her impersonal chambers staring at the ceiling, she thought about all the questions she still needed answers to. About what happened 7 years ago that broke a man so thoroughly. About what kind of danger required bruised knuckles and unsigned letters. About whether the real monster in this story was Rowan Ashford or something else entirely. Something that was still lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next chance to strike. She fell asleep with the journal hidden under her pillow and the certainty that she'd just jumped into something far deeper and darker than a simple arranged marriage. In the morning, everything would change. But tonight, in the quiet, Elara Ashford made herself a promise. She would find the truth. Whatever it cost. Whatever it revealed. Even if it destroyed her. Especially if it destroyed her. Because sometimes the only way out is through, and sometimes the only way to heal is to tear open the wound and clean out everything that's been festering in the dark. And this house, this family, had been festering for far too long. The change started small, like cracks in ice before the whole surface shatters. 3 days after her confrontation with Rowan, Elara decided she was done asking permission. She found Miss Thornberry in the schoolroom, drilling Catherine and Lydia on French conjugations. The girls sat ramrod straight at their desks, reciting verbs with the enthusiasm of prisoners confessing crimes. "Miss Thornberry," Elara said from the doorway, "the girls are coming with me this afternoon." The governess's head snapped up. "Your Grace, we have a schedule." "I'm aware. Consider the schedule adjusted." Elara stepped into the room, and both girls' eyes went wide. "We're going for a walk, fresh air, maybe some conversation that doesn't involve verb tenses. His Grace is very particular about the curriculum. His Grace isn't here. I am." Elara met the governess's stare without flinching. 2 hours, that's all I'm asking." Miss Thornberry's mouth pressed into a line so thin it nearly disappeared. "I will need to inform His Grace of this disruption." "Please do. Catherine, Lydia, coats and boots. Let's go." The girls looked between Elara and their governess like they were watching a duel neither knew who'd win. Finally, moving with the caution of deer approaching a clearing, they stood and followed Elara from the room. Miss Thornberry's voice followed them down the corridor. "This is highly irregular." "Yeah," Elara muttered under her breath. "That's kind of the point." Outside, the autumn air hit like cold water to the face, sharp, clean, alive in ways the manor never was. Elara led the girls through the formal gardens, past hedges trimmed into geometric precision, toward the wild moors that stretched beyond the estate's carefully controlled borders. They walked in silence for 10 minutes. 15. The girls kept that same military posture, even out here where no one was watching. "All right," Elara finally said, stopping at the top of a rise where you could see the whole valley spread out below. "New rule. For the next 2 hours, you're not Lady Catherine and Lady Lydia. You're just Catherine and Lydia. And I'm just Elara. No titles, no formality, just 3 people having a conversation. Think you can manage that?" Catherine spoke for the first time, voice barely above a whisper. "Father says proper address is—" "I know what your father says. I'm married to him, remember? But out here there's no father, no Miss Thornberry, no rules about how young ladies should behave, just us. So let's try this. What do you actually want to talk about?" Silence. Long enough that Elara thought maybe she'd pushed too hard, too fast. Then Lydia said, so quietly Elara almost missed it, "Why did you marry him?" Catherine's head whipped toward her sister, horrified. "Lydia? No, it's okay." Elara sat down right there on the cold grass, propriety be damned. "It's a fair question. You want the polite answer or the honest one?" "Honest," Lydia said, and there was something fierce in those gray eyes that reminded Elara of Rowan. "Honest. My father gambled away everything we had. My family was drowning in debt. Your father needed a wife. Society demanded it, apparently. So a deal was made. My family got money. He got, well, me. Not exactly a fairy tale." "So you don't love him," Catherine said, still standing, still careful. "I don't know him. Hard to love someone who won't let you pass the front door." Elara plucked at the grass, watching the wind move across the moor. But I'm stubborn, and I'm here now. And I figure maybe if I stick around long enough, I'll understand what makes this whole house feel like it's holding its breath. Lydia sat down beside her, close but not touching. It's because of Mother. Lydia, Catherine's voice cracked with warning. She wants to know, everyone wants to know, but nobody asks. Lydia wrapped her arms around her knees. Mother died 7 years ago. Everyone says it was an accident, but Miss Thornberry says Mother was weak, that she couldn't handle being a duchess, that she ran away and something bad happened and it was her own fault. Elara felt something cold settle in her stomach. Miss Thornberry told you that? She tells us lots of things. About how we have to be strong, how we can't trust our feelings, how if we're not perfect, we'll end up like Mother. Lydia's voice broke. Catherine finally sat, but kept distance between them. Father doesn't talk about her. Not ever. There's a portrait in the gallery, but he had it moved to storage. All her things are packed away. It's like she never existed. Except she did exist, Elara said carefully. She was your mother. You're allowed to remember her. You're allowed to miss her. Are we? Catherine's face was so carefully blank it hurt to look at. Because it doesn't feel like it. Feels like we're supposed to pretend she never happened, that we never had a mother, that we just appeared one day, fully formed and properly behaved. That's... Elara stopped herself, swallowed the anger that wanted to come out as shouting. That's not fair to either of you. You lost your mother. That's not something you just get over or pretend didn't happen. Father did, Lydia said. I don't think he did. I think he's just very good at pretending. They sat there in the wind, 3 people who barely knew each other, connected by the ghost of a woman none of them could talk about. What was she like? Elara asked. Your mother. Not what Miss Thornberry says. What do you remember? Lydia looked at Catherine. Catherine looked at the horizon. For a moment, Elara thought neither would answer. Then Catherine said, voice rough with disuse, she laughed. A lot. Father hated it, said it wasn't dignified, but she'd laugh anyway. At dinner parties, during formal events, like she couldn't help it. Like joy was something that just bubbled up and had to come out. She made up songs, Lydia added. Silly ones. About the servants and the horses and the weather. Miss Thornberry says it was improper, but I loved them. She sounds wonderful. She was. Catherine's hands twisted in her skirt. And then she wasn't here anymore. And Father said we had to be strong, that we had to honor her memory by being perfect, by never causing trouble, by being the daughters she would have been proud of. But we're not, Lydia whispered. I cry too much. Catherine's too quiet. We're both disappointments. Elara reached out and took Lydia's hand. The girl flinched but didn't pull away. Listen to me, both of you. You are not disappointments. You're children who lost their mother. That's not weakness. That's not failure. That's just the worst thing that can happen. And you survived it. You're still here. That takes more strength than Miss Thornberry or your father or anyone else will ever understand. Father wouldn't agree, Catherine said. Then your father's wrong. The words hung in the air between them, dangerous as lightning. They stayed out there for the full 2 hours, talking in fits and starts about nothing and everything. Favorite books, least favorite lessons, what the moor looked like in summer, whether the stars were really as infinite as everyone said. Small things. Human things. The kind of conversation that happened when people stopped performing and started being real. When they finally headed back, the girls walked less like soldiers. Not transformed. Elara wasn't naive enough to think one afternoon could undo years of rigid control, but different, looser, like they'd remembered how to breathe properly. Miss Thornberry met them at the door, face carved from disapproval. His Grace wishes to see you, Your Grace. Immediately. Of course he does, Elara muttered. To the girls, go get cleaned up for dinner. I'll see you later. She found Rowan in his study, standing by the window with his back to the door. The set of his shoulders told her everything she needed to know about how this conversation would go. You dismissed Miss Thornberry's schedule, he said without turning around. I took your daughters for a walk, without permission. I didn't realize I needed permission to spend time with my stepdaughters. Everything in this house operates on structure. You know this. What I know, Elara said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her, is that your daughters are terrified. that they've been taught to see their mother's death as a failure of character, that they think loving someone or showing emotion makes them weak. And I know that's not structure. That's cruelty dressed up as discipline. Rowan turned and his face was carved from ice. You've been here less than a week. Long enough to see what's broken. Nothing is broken. My daughters are well cared for. They have everything they need, except a father who actually talks to them, except permission to grieve, except the understanding that being human isn't a character flaw. Don't. His voice dropped to something dangerous. Don't pretend you understand what it takes to raise children alone, to keep them safe in a world that would destroy them given half a chance. Safe from what, Rowan? What are you so afraid of? That's not your concern. I'm your wife. They're my stepdaughters. That makes it entirely my concern. They stared at each other across the desk, and Elara could see something working in his face, anger and fear, and something that might have been desperation if he'd let it show properly. You want to help? He finally said. Fine. Help by not undermining the structures that keep this family functioning. Help by supporting the rules instead of breaking them. Help by being part of the solution instead of creating new problems. The rules are the problem, Rowan. The rules are all that's keeping us together. No, the rules are what's tearing you apart. You're just too scared to see it. His hand slammed down on the desk hard enough to make papers jump. I said enough. Why? Elara stepped closer, that reckless thing in her chest burning hot now. Why is it so dangerous to talk about this? About your wife? About what really happened 7 years ago? Because talking won't change anything. It won't bring her back. It won't undo the damage. It won't make any of this easier. Maybe not, but it might help your daughters understand why their father turned into a stranger. Get out. Rowan, I said get out. So she did, again, because what choice did she have? But this time, walking away felt less like retreat and more like regrouping. That night, Elara went back to the journal. She read it cover to cover this time, piecing together the story of the first Duchess. Her name had been Margaret. She'd married Rowan at 20, full of hope and romantic ideas about being a duchess. The early entries were almost painful to read. So much optimism, so much belief that love conquered all. Then the slow decay. The realization that Rowan was changing, that he was involved in something he wouldn't talk about, that he'd come home bruised and bloody and refused to explain, that he was pulling away from her, from their daughters, from everything that made them a family. I found documents today, one entry read, hidden in his study, reports about the mines, conditions that sound like hell on earth, children working underground, men dying of black lung before they're 40, and profits, such enormous profits, going to families like ours. I confronted him. He said I didn't understand, that the world was more complicated than I knew, that some battles required sacrifice. But what about the families making those sacrifices? What about the children in the dark? Further on, he's obsessed now, collecting evidence, meeting with people I don't know. He says he's trying to fix it, to expose the corruption, but it's consuming him. He barely sleeps, barely eats. The girls ask where Papa is, and I don't know what to tell them. And finally, I can't do this anymore, can't watch him destroy himself, can't let my daughters grow up thinking this is what love looks like, cold and distant and full of secrets. I'm leaving, taking the girls to my sister's. Maybe he'll notice we're gone. Maybe he'll care. Maybe it's already too late. The last entry was dated the day she died. Elara sat there, holding a dead woman's secrets, and felt pieces clicking into place. Rowan hadn't been having an affair. He'd been trying to expose something. Mind conditions, labor exploitation, the kind of thing that got people killed. And Margaret had left him for it, or tried to leave. But what happened between that last entry and her death? What changed? And why did everyone seem to think it was her fault? A knock on the door made Elara jump so hard she nearly dropped the journal. Your Grace? Mrs. Brennan's voice. There's a gentleman here to see you. He says it's urgent. At this hour? He's quite insistent. Says his name is Thomas Garrett, that he was a friend of the first Duchess. Elara's heart kicked. I'll be right down. She hid the journal and threw on a robe, then followed Mrs. Brennan to the drawing room. A man waited there, maybe 50, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent his life outdoors and the nervous energy of someone who knew he shouldn't be here. Your Grace. He stood when she entered, twisting his cap in his hands. "I'm sorry for the late hour. I heard you'd married the Duke. Thought maybe you should know some things." "What things?" He glanced at Mrs. Brennan. "Private things." The housekeeper stiffened. "I cannot leave her Grace alone with—" "It's fine, Mrs. Brennan." Elara kept her voice steady. "Mr. Garrett and I will be perfectly proper. You can wait just outside if it makes you feel better." Mrs. Brennan clearly didn't like it, but she withdrew, closing the door most of the way, but not completely. "Talk fast," Elara said to Garrett, "before someone decides this is too irregular and throws you out." "Right. So, I worked the mines 15 years back, Blackwood Mines, east of here. Conditions were, bad doesn't cover it. We were dying down there. Kids, too. Young as 8, working 14-hour shifts. Black lung, cave-ins. Accidents that weren't accidents, if you know what I mean." "I'm listening." 7 years ago, the Duke, your husband, he started asking questions. Quiet-like at first, then louder. He was collecting evidence, testimonies, proof that the mine owners were breaking every labor law on the books. Said he was going to take it to Parliament, make them pay. Elara's breath caught. The mine owners didn't like that. That's putting it gentle. They tried bribing him, threatening him. When that didn't work, Garrett's face twisted. They went after his wife. Margaret, Lady Margaret, yeah, sweet woman. Used to visit the mine families, bring food and medicine. Against her husband's wishes, he said it was too dangerous, that she was making herself a target. She wouldn't listen. Garrett's hands tightened on his cap. They staged an accident, her carriage. Made it look like the driver lost control on a bad road. But I knew the driver. He was murdered, horse spooked on purpose. Whole thing was a message. The room felt too small suddenly, too cold. And Rowan? Blamed himself. Said if he'd just kept quiet, if he'd just accepted how things were, she'd still be alive. The mine owners got off clean, no evidence, no witnesses willing to talk, and the Duke, he broke. Pulled back all the evidence, stopped pushing, buried the whole thing and himself with it. So the whispers, Elara said slowly, the ones that say he caused his wife's death, they're not wrong, not exactly. He didn't kill her, but his crusade did, and everyone knows it. The mine owners made sure of that. Spread just enough truth mixed with rumor to destroy his reputation without ever being held accountable themselves. Elara sat down heavily. Why are you telling me this? Because you're asking questions. Same kind of questions Lady Margaret asked. And I don't want... His voice cracked. I don't want another good woman to end up in a ditch because she cared too much. Are you saying I'm in danger? I'm saying the families who run those mines, they're still powerful, still connected, and they don't like attention. The Duke learned to keep his head down, but if you start stirring things up... Garrett met her eyes directly. Just be careful, that's all. Be careful who you trust and what you say and where you go alone. He left after that, slipping out into the night like he'd never been there. Elara sat in the drawing room, mind racing, while Mrs. Brennan stood in the doorway, radiating disapproval. That man, the housekeeper said carefully, has a reputation for causing trouble. Or for telling the truth that people don't want to hear. There's a difference. His Grace won't be pleased. His Grace doesn't need to know. Elara stood, drew herself up to full Duchess height. And if you value your position here, you'll remember that some conversations are private, understood? Mrs. Brennan's face went carefully blank. Yes, Your Grace. But Elara saw it in her eyes. The calculation, the loyalty to Rowan that would always trump loyalty to a new wife who'd been here less than a week, which meant she had maybe hours before Rowan found out about the late-night visitor. She needed to move fast. The next morning, Elara did something monumentally stupid. She went to the mines. Not the Blackwood mines. Those had been shut down years ago, Garrett had said, after the scandal got too big to completely bury. But there were others. Smaller operations. Still running. Still using the same brutal practices that had gotten people killed. She took the carriage and lied to the driver, said she wanted to visit the village market. Then she walked. 3 miles across rough country, following directions Garrett had scrawled on a scrap of paper before leaving. The Whitestone mine sat in a valley that looked like something had taken a bite out of the earth. Black slag heaps, gray buildings, the constant thud of machinery echoing off the hills. Elara approached the mine office with her heart in her throat and her spine straight. A man looked up from a desk cluttered with papers, took in her fine clothes and clean hands, and immediately shifted from bored to hostile. Help you? I'm researching labor conditions in the region for a charitable organization. I'd like to speak with your workers. His laugh was sharp as broken glass. Would you now? And who exactly are you? A concerned citizen. Right. Well, this is private property, and our workers are busy. So you can take your charity and... I'm the Duchess of Ashford. That stopped him. His face went through several expressions. Surprise, calculation, then something that might have been fear. Does the Duke know you're here? Does it matter? It does if you want to leave in one piece. He stood, and suddenly the small office felt dangerous. The Duke learned his lesson about poking into business that doesn't concern him. Figured his new wife would be smarter. Or maybe, Elara said, voice steadier than she felt, I'm exactly smart enough to know when something's wrong. Nothing's wrong here. We run a clean operation, follow all the regulations. Then you won't mind me speaking with your workers, confirming that. His hand moved toward something under the desk. I think you should leave. Now. Before there's an incident. Elara held her ground for 3 more seconds, long enough to see the file folders on his desk, the names written in cramped handwriting, the accident report stacked high enough to be a fire hazard, long enough to memorize the manager's face, the scar on his cheek, the way his left hand was missing 2 fingers. Then she turned and walked out, spine straight, refusing to run even though every instinct screamed at her to move faster. She made it half a mile before she heard hoofbeats. 3 men on horses, riding hard, cutting off her path back to the village. Elara stopped, mind racing through options that all ended badly. Duchess? The lead rider was younger than the others, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Dangerous country for a lady alone. I'm managing fine. Are you? Because it looks to me like you're lost. Long way from Ashford Manor. I was visiting the village. Wrong direction for that. He nudged his horse closer. You know what happened to the last Duchess who stuck her nose where it didn't belong? Tragic accident. Very sad. Would hate to see history repeat itself. Elara's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack ribs. Are you threatening me? Just expressing concern. These moors are treacherous, easy to lose your way, easy to have a fall. His smile widened. Easy for things to go wrong. And if something did go wrong, Elara said, forcing her voice level, you don't think my husband would notice? You don't think there'd be questions? Oh, there'd be questions. Same questions as last time. And same answers. Tragic accident, terrible loss, nothing to be done. He leaned down, close enough that she could smell tobacco and malice. The Duke knows how this works. He stayed quiet after his first wife died. He'll stay quiet after the second, because that's what men like him do when they learn their place. Then he wheeled his horse and rode off, the other 2 following, leaving Elara standing alone in the middle of nowhere with her knees shaking and her hands clenched so tight her nails drew blood. She walked back to the village, found the carriage, told the driver to take her home, and the whole way she thought about Margaret, about a woman who'd tried to do the right thing and ended up dead, about a husband who'd blamed himself so completely he'd turned into stone rather than risk feeling anything again, about 2 little girls growing up in a house full of rules designed to keep them safe by keeping them small. By the time she reached Ashford Manor, Elara had made a decision. She was done being careful. Done asking permission, done pretending that silence was safer than truth. She was going to finish what Margaret started, even if it killed her. She found Rowan in the stables, which surprised her. He stood in one of the stalls, currying a black horse with mechanical precision, and didn't look up when she approached. I know where you went, he said. Elara's stomach dropped. Rowan, Mrs. Brennan told me about your visitor last night, Thomas Garrett. Then the carriage driver reported you asked to go to the village but got out early, walked toward the mines. He kept currying, each stroke controlled, measured. Do you have any idea how spectacularly stupid that was? I needed to see for myself. See what? Confirm that yes, terrible things happen in places where people have no power to stop them? Congratulations, you've discovered injustice. Welcome to the real world. This isn't about discovering anything. This is about doing something. There's nothing to do. Finally, he looked at her, and his face was carved from exhaustion and old anger. I tried 7 years ago. I collected evidence, built a case, risked everything to make them pay. And you know what happened? They killed my wife. They threatened my daughters. They made it clear that the next body in a ditch would be someone even smaller and more innocent, so I backed off. Because that's what you do when you realize some fights can't be won. Or, Elara said, that's what you do when you're alone, when you're trying to carry everything yourself, when you've convinced yourself that caring about people means putting them in danger. It does mean that. Margaret died because powerful men chose violence over accountability. That's not your fault. That's theirs. Rowan's hand clenched around the curry brush. You think blame matters? You think it makes any difference whose fault it technically was? She's still dead. My daughter still grew up without a mother. I still had to look them in the eyes and explain that Mama wasn't coming back because Papa made people angry. They don't blame you. They should. They blame themselves for not being perfect enough, for crying, for feeling things. Because you taught them that emotions are dangerous, that love is a liability, that the safest way to live is to never let anyone close enough to hurt you. He flinched like she'd hit him. That's exactly what you did. You took your grief and your guilt, and you built a prison out of them. And you locked your daughters inside with you, and now you're so used to the bars you can't even see them anymore. Stop. No. Because those men today, the ones who threaten me, they're counting on you staying quiet. They're counting on you being so scared of losing someone else that you'll never fight back. They're betting that grief and fear will keep you controllable. And they're right. Rowan's voice broke. Because I can't. I won't risk my daughters. I won't put them in danger just to make myself feel like I'm doing something noble. What if it's not about being noble? Elara stepped closer. What if it's just about being right? About saying that what happened to Margaret was murder, not an accident? About making sure those mind conditions don't kill someone else's mother? One person can't change this. You're right, one person can't. But what about 2? What about 10? What about everyone who's lost someone to those mines and been too afraid to speak up? Rowan shook his head. You're naive. You have no idea what you're up against. Then teach me. Show me the evidence you collected. Let me help. No. Rowan, I said no. I won't let you do this. I won't let you make yourself a target. I won't. His voice cracked completely. I can't bury another wife. I can't do it. So whatever crusade you think you're starting, stop now, before it's too late. Elara looked at this man she'd married, the stranger who was starting to feel less strange, and saw all the pieces finally making sense. The cold control, the rigid rules, the way he held everyone at arm's length. It wasn't cruelty, it was terror. The desperate attempt of someone who'd lost everything to protect the few things he had left. I'm sorry, she said softly. For what happened to Margaret, for what you've carried alone all these years, for the impossible choice you had to make. Then you'll stop. No, because stopping means those men win. It means Margaret died for nothing. It means other mothers will keep dying and their children will keep losing them and nothing will ever change. She took a breath. But I won't do this alone. I won't make your mistakes. I'll be careful. I'll be smart. And I'll give you a choice. What choice? Help me or trust me. But don't try to stop me, because I'm doing this either way. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 7 years of grief and new possibilities, and the terrible risk of hoping for something better. Finally, Rowan said, You're going to get yourself killed. Maybe. Or maybe I'm going to finish what you started. And if I can't protect you, then don't. Protect your daughters. Keep them safe. But let me fight. He stared at her. Something working behind those iron eyes. War between fear and hope. Between the man he'd been and the man he might have been if things had gone differently. If you do this, he said slowly, you do it my way. No more surprise visits to mines. No more confronting people alone. You follow my rules, all of them. Because I won't lose another. He stopped, swallowed hard. I won't lose you. It wasn't love, wasn't even close, But it was the first crack in the wall. And maybe, Elara thought, maybe that was enough to start with. Then we start tonight, Elara said. Rowan's face went through something complicated. Surprise warring with resignation, like he'd known this moment was coming, but hoped it wouldn't be quite so soon. He set down the curry brush with the careful precision of a man trying not to break something. The evidence is in my study, hidden. It's been 7 years, but... He stopped, jaw working. I couldn't bring myself to destroy it. Kept thinking maybe someday, show me. They walked back to the manor in silence that felt different from before. Not comfortable exactly, but charged with purpose. Shared purpose. The kind that made Elara's pulse kick faster even as her stomach twisted with fear. The study was dark when they entered, curtains drawn against the afternoon light. Rowan lit a lamp, then moved to the bookshelf behind his desk. His fingers traced along the spines until they found what they were looking for. He pulled, and a section of the shelf swung outward on hidden hinges. Dramatic, Elara observed. Necessary. He reached into the cavity and pulled out a leather case, thick with papers. Margaret found it once, said it was very Gothic novel of me. She wasn't wrong. It was the first time he'd said his first wife's name without flinching. Elara noticed but didn't comment. The case opened to reveal stacks of documents, testimonies written in cramped handwriting, medical reports, photographs that made Elara's stomach turn. Children with faces gray from coal dust, men bent double from lung disease. A woman's body laid out in what looked like a mine shaft crushed under fallen timber. This is from Blackwood, Rowan said, spreading papers across his desk. I spent 2 years gathering this. Interviews with workers, evidence of safety violations, proof that the owners knew about the dangers and chose profit over lives. His hand hovered over a photograph. This boy was 9, worked the mines because his father died in a collapse. Black lung got him before he turned 12. Elara picked up another document. These names, the mine owners, some of them are familiar. They should be. Half of them sit in Parliament. The other half fund the campaigns of those who do. That's why nothing changed. Why my evidence went nowhere. Because the people with power to fix it are the same people profiting from it. But you tried. You took it to Parliament anyway. I did. Filed formal complaints, presented my research. Got laughed out of the room by men who'd been taking bribes for decades. His voice went flat. 3 days later, Margaret's carriage went off the road. They called it an accident. I knew better. Elara studied the documents, mind already working. This is still good, still usable. We just need a different approach, Rowan finished. Not Parliament, not the law. Because the law is bought and paid for by the same men we'd be accusing. Then what? Public pressure, the newspapers? Tried that too. Every editor I approached either refused the story or printed it so buried on page 12 that nobody noticed. Money buys silence. You'd be amazed how much silence it can buy. Elara sat down heavily, staring at the evidence of atrocity spread across mahogany. So what's the play? Because I refuse to believe we've hit a dead end before we've even started. Rowan was quiet for a long moment, looking at the papers like they were ghosts he'd tried to bury. There's one thing I didn't try, didn't have the resources for back then. What? Mobilizing the families, the workers, everyone who's lost someone to the mines. If we could get them to speak up together, not individually where they can be threatened or bought off, but as a collective voice, that's harder to silence. A union, Elara said. Effectively. Though calling it that would get people killed faster than you could blink. But organized resistance? A coordinated refusal to stay quiet? That might work, if we're careful, if we're smart. He met her eyes. If we're willing to accept that it might not work at all. Then we make it work. Over the next week, they planned in secret. Late nights in Rowan's study after the household slept, papers spread between them, mapping out strategy like generals preparing for war, which, Elara supposed, they were. Thomas Garrett became their liaison to the mining families. He moved carefully, speaking only to people he trusted, testing the waters. The response was mixed. Half were too scared to get involved, remembering what happened last time someone challenged the owners. The other half were angry enough, desperate enough, broken enough to want revenge. We've got maybe 40 families willing to stand up, Garrett reported one night, slipping into the manor through the servants' entrance. More if we can promise protection. Less if things get violent. They'll get violent, Rowan said flatly. The owners won't let this happen peacefully. Then we need leverage. Something that makes it more dangerous for them to act than to negotiate. Lara tapped the photographs. We document everything. Get these to newspapers in London, not just locally. Make it a national story. Put enough public attention on it that they can't just disappear people without consequences. You're talking about exposing some of the most powerful families in England, Rowan said. They won't take that lying down. Good. I'm tired of them being comfortable while children die underground. Garrett grinned, sharp and feral. Duchess has teeth. I like it. But making it happen required resources they didn't have. Money to pay for safe travel for the families willing to testify. Connections to journalists who couldn't be bought. Protection for people who'd be marked as troublemakers the moment they spoke up. I have some jewelry, Elara offered. From my mother. Not worth much, but no. Rowan's tone was final. We're not funding this with your dowry. Then what? Your accounts are watched. Any large withdrawal would be noticed. He stared at the papers, jaw tight. There's one option, but you're not going to like it. Try me. We invite them here, the families. Host a gathering, call it a tenants' dinner, something that looks charitable and benevolent, very Duchess-like. His mouth twisted. Get them all in one place where they can meet, organize, coordinate their stories. Then I go to London personally. Deliver the evidence myself, not to Parliament, to the press. Every newspaper I can find. Make such a public spectacle that they can't bury it. That puts a target on your back. Already have one. At least this way I'm moving instead of sitting still and waiting. And while you're in London, while this house is full of mine workers and their families, you don't think the owners will notice? Won't figure out what we're doing? They'll notice. That's why you'll need to sell it. Make it look like nothing more than a new duchess trying to win over the locals. Can you do that? Elara thought about performance, about smile and manners and all the social games her mother had drilled into her. Yeah, I can do that. Then we move in 3 days. I'll send invitations tonight. Make it look official, printed cards, formal wording, the whole production. Meanwhile, Garrett spreads word through his network about the real purpose. 3 days isn't much time. 3 days is all we have. The longer we wait, the more chance someone talks. The more chance this whole thing falls apart before it starts. So they moved fast. Invitations went out to 50 families. Workers, widows, anyone who'd been touched by the mines. Rowan framed it as a gesture of goodwill from his new duchess, a way to strengthen ties between the manor and the community. Very proper, very expected. Mrs. Brennan had opinions. Your Grace, forgive me, but hosting 50 working families for dinner, the logistics alone, will be managed, Elara said firmly. I'm not asking permission. I'm informing you of what's happening. We'll need tables set up in the Great Hall. Simple food, nothing fancy. These are working people, not aristocrats. And I want it to feel welcoming, not like charity. The housekeeper's face did something complicated. His Grace approves of this? His Grace suggested it. That got a reaction. Surprise, quickly masked. I see. Then we'll make it work. But Elara saw the calculation in her eyes, saw her filing away this information, probably planning to mention it to someone. The staff's loyalty ran deep, but not necessarily in the direction Elara needed. Mrs. Brennan, she said carefully, there are people in this community who want to hurt this family, who want to see the Duke fail. I need to know, can I trust you? The housekeeper straightened. I've served this house for 30 years, Your Grace, through the previous Duke, through His Grace's marriage to Lady Margaret, through everything that followed. My loyalty is to Ashford Manor and the family that holds it. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give. Mrs. Brennan met her eyes directly. But if you're asking whether I'll protect this household, yes, whatever that requires. It would have to be enough. The next 2 days were chaos. Staff preparing the Great Hall, moving furniture, setting up tables. Cook threatening to quit at least twice over the menu. Miss Thornberry horrified that common miners would be eating in the same room where nobility once dined. The girls watched it all with wide eyes. What's happening? Lydia asked, finding Elara in the Great Hall supervising table arrangements. We're hosting a dinner for families from the mining communities. Why? Because it's the right thing to do. Catherine appeared in the doorway, quieter than her sister, but equally curious. Miss Thornberry says you're making trouble. Miss Thornberry says a lot of things. Elara crouched down to their level. Sometimes doing the right thing looks like trouble to people who benefit from things staying wrong. Does that make sense? Not really, Lydia admitted. That's okay. You'll understand when you're older. She paused. Actually, no. That's what adults say when they don't want to explain. Let me try again. There are people being hurt. Your father tried to help them once, and bad things happened. We're trying again. Differently this time, but still dangerous. Will they hurt you? Catherine's voice was barely audible. Like they hurt Mother? Elara's chest tightened. We're being careful. That's not an answer, Catherine said, with an echo of Mrs. Brennan's earlier words. No, it's not. Because I don't know. But I know staying quiet while people suffer is worse than risking ourselves to help. And I think your mother knew that too. Lydia grabbed her hand. Don't die. I'll do my best. It wasn't a promise. She couldn't make that promise. But it was honest, and right now honest was all she had to give. The night before the dinner, Rowan called her to his study. There's been a complication, he said without preamble. Elara's stomach dropped. What kind? I got word from London. The newspapers I was planning to contact, 3 of them have new ownership as of this week, bought out by companies with ties to the mine owners. The 4th just fired their investigative staff. That's not coincidence. No, someone knows what we're planning, or suspects. Either way, my original plan won't work. The press won't touch this if they're already compromised. Elara sank into a chair. So what now? There's one other option. Dangerous, possibly suicidal. He pulled out a letter, expensive paper with an official seal. I got this today. Invitation to a gathering at the Blackwood estate, Lord Nathaniel Blackwood, head of the mining consortium, 2 weeks from now. Every major mine owner will be there, plus half of Parliament. You think that's a trap? Absolutely. But it's also an opportunity. If I can get into that gathering, not as a guest, obviously, but close enough, I could deliver the evidence directly, in front of witnesses, make accusations where they can't be ignored or buried. They destroy you, socially, financially, possibly literally. Yes. And you're willing to do that? Rowan looked at her for a long moment. 7 years ago, I backed down because I was afraid, because I had too much to lose. But I lost it anyway, just slowly, piece by piece, until I didn't recognize myself anymore. So yeah, I'm willing. Question is whether you are. Me? This dinner tomorrow. It's not just about organizing the families anymore. It's about giving them hope, making them believe change is possible. You're the face of that. While I'm in London making noise, you're here keeping them safe and coordinated. Can you do that? Elara thought about everything that could go wrong, about men on horses and whispered threats, about Margaret's carriage going off the road, about 2 little girls who'd already lost one mother. Yes, she said, I can do that. The dinner started smoothly enough. Families arrived in their best clothes, clean but worn, mended carefully but showing age. They filled the great hall with nervous energy, eyes wide at the grandeur even as they tried not to look impressed. Elara worked the room with a smile and steel spine, greeting each family, learning names, asking about their children. Playing the gracious Duchess while Rowan moved through the crowd with quiet intensity, identifying the ones willing to speak up, the ones who'd be reliable, the ones who'd fold under pressure. Thomas Garrett watched from the edges, tracking everything. Dinner was served, simple food, but plenty of it, and slowly the tension eased. People started talking, sharing stories, building connections. Exactly what they needed. That's when the doors burst open. 6 men strode in, led by someone Elara recognized from her ill-fated visit to Whitestone Mine, the manager with the scarred face and missing fingers. Behind him, 3 men in expensive suits who carried themselves like they owned the air they breathed. Well, the lead suit said, voice dripping contempt. Isn't this cozy? The Duke and Duchess playing savior to the unwashed masses. The hall went silent. Rowan moved to intercept them, positioning himself between the intruders and the families. Lord Blackwood wasn't expecting you. So this was him, Nathaniel Blackwood, head of the mining consortium. Up close, he looked like what you'd get if you distilled privilege and cruelty into human form. Handsome in a cold way, smile sharp as knives. I heard my workers were being entertained at Ashford Manor. Thought I should pay my respects. His gaze swept the room, cataloging faces. Especially since some of them have been spreading troublesome rumors about working conditions, about accidents that weren't accidents. Slander, really. It's not slander if it's true, Rowan said quietly. Oh? You have proof of these wild claims? Because I seem to recall you tried this before, Duke, 7 years ago. How did that work out for you? The threat was naked, undisguised. Several families were already edging toward the exits. That was different, Rowan said. I was alone then. And now you have a wife who doesn't know when to keep quiet. How unfortunate. For her. Blackwood's smile widened. Tell me, Duchess, have you enjoyed your exploration of our mining operations? I heard you visited Whitestone last week. Dangerous place for someone unfamiliar with industrial work. Easy to have accidents. Elara felt every eye in the room turn to her, felt the weight of the moment. She could back down, play diplomatic, diffuse this, save herself. Or she could do what she came here to do. I did visit Whitestone, she said clearly. Saw the conditions, the child laborers, the lack of basic safety measures, everything that would be illegal if anyone with power cared enough to enforce the law. Careful, Your Grace. Accusations like that require evidence. We have evidence. She looked at Rowan, saw him nod fractionally. Photographs, testimonies, medical reports. Everything needed to prove what you've been doing, what you've been getting away with, for decades. Blackwood's smile didn't waver, but something cold flashed in his eyes. Do you know what happened to the last person who made such claims against me? Against my family's interests? I know exactly what happened. You killed her, made it look like an accident, then buried the truth along with her body. The hall erupted, families gasping, Rowan moving toward her, Blackwood's men reaching inside their coats. You have no proof of that, Blackwood said, voice dropping to something deadly. Don't I? Elara pulled a folded paper from her sleeve, one of Margaret's journal entries, the one describing the unsigned letters, the late-night meetings, her suspicions. Margaret Ashford kept detailed records, including her concerns about being followed, about threats against her family. She knew something was wrong, and she was right. A dead woman's paranoid ramblings, combined with testimony from the carriage driver's family, combined with evidence of payoffs to the local magistrate to rule it an accident without proper investigation, combined with 3 other accidents that happened to whistleblowers in the past decade. She stepped forward. You're not untouchable, Lord Blackwood. You're just protected by silence, and we're done being silent. For a long moment, nobody moved. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Then Blackwood laughed. Brave, stupid, but brave. You think revealing this here, in front of these people, protects you? All you've done is sign their death warrants along with your own. There are 50 witnesses in this room. That's 50 problems I now have to solve. And I'm very good at solving problems. You can't kill 50 people without it being noticed, Rowan said. Can I? A mine collapse is very tragic. So many casualties. And who would question it? These things happen, especially in operations that workers claim are unsafe. His smile was genuinely amused now. You've done my work for me, Duke. Gathered all the troublemakers in one convenient location. I should thank you. That's when Elara realized their mistake. They'd been so focused on gathering support, on building a coalition, that they'd created a target, a single point of failure. These people are my guests, she said, voice steadier than her hands, under my protection. You touch them, and what? You'll report me? To whom? The magistrates I pay? The politicians I fund? The newspapers I own? Blackwood shook his head. Your children playing at Revolution. Let me show you how it's really done. He turned to leave, and Elara knew, absolutely knew, that if he walked out that door, everyone in this room was dead. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. Accidents would happen, buildings would catch fire, mines would collapse, and the truth would die with them. She made a choice, probably the wrong choice, definitely a dangerous one. I sent copies, she blurted out, of everything, to journalists in London, Edinburgh, Manchester. with instructions to publish if anything happens to me or these families. You kill us, you make martyrs, you guarantee exposure. It was a lie. A complete lie. They hadn't had time, but Blackwood didn't know that. His face went very still. You're bluffing. Am I? You want to bet 50 lives on it? Your reputation? Your fortune? She forced herself to meet his eyes. Because I've got nothing to lose. My family's already ruined. I married into this to save them, and I've done that. Everything after this is borrowed time. But you? You've got everything to lose. The calculation played out on his face, measuring risk, weighing options, trying to decide if she was crazy enough to have actually done it. Prove it, he said finally. Show me these copies you supposedly sent. Why would I do that? So you can intercept them? Chase them down? Elara shook her head. They're gone. Out there, waiting. Insurance policy. Blackwood stared at her for another long moment, and Elara felt sweat sliding down her spine despite the cold. If he called her bluff, if he pushed, this all fell apart. Then he smiled. Well played, Duchess. Reckless, but well played. I suppose we're at an impasse. Or, Rowan said, stepping forward, we're at a negotiation. Negotiation implies you have something I want. You want silence. We want reform. Seems like there's room for compromise. You want me to improve working conditions, implement safety measures, stop employing children, all things that cut into profit margins significantly, in exchange for you not publishing accusations you may or may not actually have evidence for? Blackwood laughed. That's not negotiation. That's extortion. Well, call it what you want. Those are the terms. And if I refuse, then we publish anyway. Take our chances. Because here's what you're not understanding, Lord Blackwood. These people have nothing left to lose. You've already taken everything. Their health, their families, their futures. Death isn't a threat to someone who's already living in hell. It's just earlier relief. The words hit hard. Elara saw it in the faces around the room. Recognition, agreement, a kind of desperate courage born from having already survived the worst. Blackwood saw it too, and for the first time, something like uncertainty crossed his face. I need to think about this, he said finally. You have 24 hours, Rowan replied. After that, we go public regardless. And if something unfortunate happens in that 24 hours? Then those mysterious copies get published immediately, automatically. We've set it up that way. Another lie, smooth as silk from Rowan's mouth. So pray nothing unfortunate happens. Blackwood stared at them both, then at the room full of watching families, then back. This isn't over. No, Elara agreed. It's just beginning. He left with his men, and the moment the doors closed behind them, the hall erupted into chaos. People talking over each other, some excited, some terrified, everyone trying to process what just happened. Rowan pulled Elara aside, voice low and urgent. Please tell me you actually sent those copies. I didn't. Did you? No, we've been bluffing this entire time. So if he figures that out, we're all dead, yes. Rowan ran a hand through his hair. Which means we have less than 24 hours to make that bluff real. I need to leave for London tonight, get to actual journalists, actual newspapers, actually send those packages we said we'd already sent. Well, that's 8 hours of hard writing. You won't be back before the deadline. I know, which means you're in charge. You keep these families safe. Keep them together. Keep them believing we actually know what we're doing. He gripped her shoulders. Can you do that? Elara thought about everything that could go wrong. About Blackwood coming back with armed men, about the fragile lie they'd just told that could collapse at any moment. Yeah, she said, I can do that. He kissed her then, quick, hard, desperate. Not romantic, barely even affectionate. More like a soldier going to war, stealing one last moment of connection before the battle. Then he was gone, riding into the night on his fastest horse, carrying 7 years of buried evidence toward a confrontation that would either change everything or destroy them all. Elara turned back to the hall full of frightened, hopeful, terrified faces. All right, she said, loud enough to cut through the noise. Here's what's going to happen. You're all staying here tonight. Tomorrow too, if necessary. Ashford Manor is the safest place right now. Defendable, visible, harder to attack without drawing attention. We have enough rooms, enough food. You're under my protection until this is resolved. And if Blackwood comes back, someone called out, with more men, with weapons, then we deal with it, together. Because that's the whole point of this. We stop facing them alone. We stop being easy targets. We become something they can't just eliminate quietly. Thomas Garrett stepped forward. I can organize watches. Men on the grounds, rotating shifts, make sure no one gets close without us knowing. Do it, Elara said. Mrs. Brennan, get the guest rooms ready. Anyone who doesn't fit there goes to the servants' quarters. Comfort isn't the priority right now. Safety is. The housekeeper looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Elara's face stopped her. Yes, Your Grace. The night turned into organized chaos. Families being settled into rooms, men organizing patrol routes, women clustering in the kitchens, turning nervous energy into productivity. The manor that had been silent and cold for 7 years suddenly bursting with life and noise and purpose. Elara moved through it all in a daze, giving orders, solving problems, projecting confidence she didn't feel. Around midnight, she found herself alone in Rowan's study, staring at the hidden compartment where the evidence had been stored. Empty now. Everything packed up and gone with him. A knock on the door. Catherine and Lydia stood there in their nightgowns, looking smaller than usual. Can't sleep, Lydia said. Me neither. Elara waved them in. Come here. They curled up on either side of her on the floor, backs against Rowan's desk, and for a long moment nobody spoke. Are we going to die? Catherine asked quietly. Elara almost lied. Almost gave them the platitudes adults always gave children. Everything will be fine. Don't worry. I'll keep you safe. But she'd promised them honesty. I don't know, she said instead. We've made some very powerful people very angry. They could hurt us. They want to hurt us. But we're going to fight as hard as we can to make sure that doesn't happen. Miss Thornberry left, Lydia said. Packed her bags and went this afternoon. Said she wouldn't stay in a house full of rabble. Probably for the best, Elara muttered. Will Father come back? Yes. I promise you that. He'll come back. Whether he succeeds or fails in London, he'll come back to you. Catherine leaned against her shoulder. Mother didn't come back. I know, and I can't promise you the same thing won't happen to me. But I can promise that I'm fighting for something worth fighting for. And that if something does happen, it won't be because I gave up. It'll be because I fought as hard as I could. That's not very comforting, Lydia said. No, it's not. But it's honest. They sat there until the girls fell asleep, curled against her like she was something solid they could hold on to. Elara stayed awake, listening to the sounds of the manor. 50 people trying to sleep in a house that wasn't theirs, guards walking patrol routes, the wind rattling windows. Morning came gray and cold. No word from Rowan, no sign of Blackwood. Just waiting. And then around noon a carriage arrived. Black, expensive, official-looking. Not Blackwood's style, this was government, Elara realized. Real authority. A man stepped out, older, with the kind of bearing that came from decades of power. He was accompanied by 2 others, one in military uniform, one in clerical black. Thomas Garrett appeared at her elbow. That's Lord Chancellor Morrison, one of the highest-ranking officials in England. What's he doing here? I guess we're about to find out. Elara met them in the entrance hall, spine straight, Duchess persona firmly in place. Lord Chancellor, this is unexpected. Your Grace. He bowed slightly, but his eyes were cold. I've come on behalf of the Crown. There have been some disturbing reports. Allegations of criminal activity involving several prominent families. The Duke of Ashford's name has been mentioned. Is he here? He's in London. On business. What kind of business? The kind that's none of yours unless you have a warrant. Morrison's eyebrow raised. Careful, Your Grace. Obstructing an official investigation is a serious crime. Is that what this is? An investigation? Or a cleanup operation for your friends in the mining consortium? His face went carefully blank. I don't know what you're implying. Don't you? Lord Blackwood visited last night, made threats. I'm sure you heard all about it. You people do talk to each other. And now you're here wrapping intimidation in official seals and proper procedure. Am I close? You're walking a very dangerous line. We crossed that line days ago. Question is what you're here to do about it. Morrison studied her for a long moment, then glanced at the rooms branching off the entrance hall, full of families watching this confrontation with wide eyes. "You're harboring witnesses?" he said slowly. "To what, I wonder?" "To nothing illegal. I'm hosting guests. Last I checked, that wasn't a crime." "It is if you're coordinating testimony against British interests, if you're organizing labor disruption, if I'm what? Speaking the truth? Since when is that illegal? Since it threatens the stability of industries that employ thousands, that fund government operations, that keep this country running." His voice dropped. "You're meddling in things you don't understand, Duchess. Economic forces, political realities. The Duke made this mistake once before. I'd hate to see history repeat itself." There it was. The threat wrapped in concern. The same thing that broke Rowan 7 years ago. "History's only repeating if we let it," Elara said. "And we're done letting it." "Then you're a fool." Morrison turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. Your husband, the evidence he's supposedly carrying to London, it won't matter. Every paper that might have published it has received visits today, from people explaining why certain stories aren't in the public interest. By the time he arrives, there won't be anyone willing to print a word." Elara's stomach dropped. "You can't silence everyone." "We don't have to, just enough. Just the ones that matter." He smiled, cold and final. "You gambled and you lost, Your Grace. The smart thing now would be to send these people home. Forget this ever happened. Except that some battles can't be won. Or you'll learn the same lesson your husband's first wife learned. Some fights cost more than you can afford to pay." He left then, taking his official authority and barely veiled threats with him. Elara stood in the entrance hall, feeling the weight of 50 families' hopes pressing down on her shoulders, knowing that everything they'd planned was falling apart. And then she heard hoofbeats, not the measured pace of Morrison's departure. Fast, desperate. Someone riding hard. She ran to the window and saw Rowan's horse, lathered and exhausted, carrying a rider slumped forward in the saddle. Not Rowan. Thomas Garrett. No, not Garrett either. Someone else. Someone she didn't recognize. The rider fell from the saddle as stable hands rushed forward. Someone shouted for water, for help. Elara ran outside, heart hammering, and pushed through the crowd to where the man lay gasping on the cobblestones. "Message!" he choked out, grabbing her wrist with a grip like iron. "From the Duke. They knew Blackwood knew about London. Ambush on the road." "Where is he?" Elara demanded. "Where's Rowan?" "Taken. They took him to the Blackwood estate. Said, if you want him back." The man's eyes rolled. "Said come alone. Tonight. Or they'll—" He passed out before finishing the sentence. But Elara didn't need to hear the rest. She already knew. This was the trap. The real one. Everything else had been maneuvering, positioning, getting them exactly where Blackwood wanted them. And now she had a choice. Go alone and probably die. Or stay here and let Rowan die instead. Around her, 50 families waited for her decision. For leadership. For hope. And Elara realized with crystalline clarity that there was no good choice here. No clever solution. No way to win this that didn't cost everything. So she'd have to make it cost them too. "Get everyone inside," she said, voice carrying across the courtyard. "Bar the doors. Don't open them for anyone except me. If I'm not back by dawn—" She swallowed hard. "If I'm not back by dawn, Thomas Garrett is in charge. He knows what to do." "Your Grace," someone started. "No arguments, no heroics, just survive. That's the play now. Survive and make sure this story doesn't die with us." She went inside, changed into riding clothes, and strapped a knife to her belt that she had no idea how to use properly. Then she went to the study one last time, pulled out a piece of paper, and wrote 3 letters. One to Catherine and Lydia, one to her mother, one to Rowan in case she made it to him. Then she went to the stables, took the fastest horse left, and rode toward the Blackwood estate like she was racing the devil himself. Because maybe she was. The Blackwood estate rose from the dark like a monument to old money and older sins. Elara's horse was half dead by the time she reached the gates, foam flecking its mouth, sides heaving. She dismounted badly, stumbling, catching herself on the iron bars. A guard appeared from the shadows. "You're expected." Of course she was. This whole thing had been choreographed from the start. They took her knife without asking. led her through grounds too perfect to be anything but hostile. Hedges trimmed into aggressive geometry, gravel paths raked so smooth her boots left obvious tracks. Everything designed to make you feel watched, assessed, found wanting. The house itself was worse. All marble and gilt and the kind of wealth that came from generations of not caring who got crushed to maintain it. Portraits lined the walls, blackwoods going back centuries, staring down with identical expressions of entitled disdain. "He's waiting in the library," the guard said, opening carved doors. Elara stepped through and found herself in a room that smelled like leather and old paper and something else. Something metallic. Blood, maybe. Or just the stench of power gone rotten. Nathaniel Blackwood sat behind a desk big enough to run a small country from, and slumped in a chair across from him, hands bound, face bruised. "Rowan." He looked up and something like horror crossed his face. "You shouldn't have come." "Obviously not. But here we are." Blackwood smiled, lazy and predatory. "The devoted wife, how touching. Please sit. We have much to discuss." "I'd rather stand. Suit yourself." He poured himself brandy from a crystal decanter, didn't offer her any. "Your husband has been quite stubborn, refusing to tell me where the evidence is hidden, insisting he sent it to journalists who we both know won't touch it. Very noble, very stupid. Let him go." Eventually. "First, we're going to have a conversation about reality, about how the world actually works, not how romantic fools like you think it should work." He sipped his brandy. "See, the thing about power is it's not actually that complicated. Those who have it, keep it. Those who don't, suffer. That's the whole system. Everything else is just decoration." Deep philosophy from a man who profits off child labor. Child labor, adult labor, it's all just labor. People work, I profit. They agreed to the terms. "They agreed to starvation or death," Elara said. "That's not agreement. That's coercion." "Semantics." Blackwood waved a hand dismissively. "The point is, your little crusade ends tonight. You're going to publicly recant, say you were mistaken, hysterical, whatever explanation preserves your dignity. Your husband will do the same. The families you've been harboring will disperse and return to their work. And life will continue as it always has. And if we refuse, then I demonstrate exactly what happens to people who refuse me." He nodded to someone behind her. Elara turned and saw two men dragging in another figure. Thomas Garrett, beaten worse than Rowan, barely conscious. "Mr. Garrett here was very helpful," Blackwood continued conversationally. "Told us all about your little organization, the families willing to testify, the routes you plan to use getting them to safety, everything we needed to know to neutralize the threat. In exchange, I promised him his family wouldn't be hurt. See how negotiation works? Everyone gets something." "You tortured him," Elara said flatly. "I provided incentive. There's a difference." Garrett raised his head, spat blood. "Didn't tell them everything." "No? Well, you told enough." Blackwood stood, moved around the desk with the casual confidence of someone who'd never lost at anything. "Here's what happens now. You three will sign statements saying this was all a misunderstanding. The Duke was grief-stricken over his first wife's death and saw conspiracy where there was only tragedy. You, Duchess, were naive and manipulated. And Mr. Garrett? Well, he's simply a troublemaker with a grudge. All very sad, very explainable." "No one will believe it," Rowan said, voice rough. "They don't have to believe it. They just have to accept it. Because the alternative, the truth, is too dangerous to touch." Blackwood smiled. "That's the real power, Duke, not forcing people to believe lies. Just making the truth cost too much to acknowledge." Elara's mind raced. They were trapped, outmaneuvered. Even if she refused, even if she died here tonight, Blackwood would just fabricate whatever story he wanted. The families back at Ashford Manor would be dealt with. The evidence would disappear. Everything would go back to how it was. Unless— "You're right," she said slowly, "about power, about how it works, about how the truth costs too much." Rowan's head snapped up. "Elara, but here's the thing you didn't account for." She met Blackwood's eyes directly. "I'm not the one who needs to be convinced, and neither are the journalists you've already bought off. You're thinking too small." "Meaning?" meaning you assumed we were playing your game, working within your system. But we're not. We never were. She pulled something from inside her jacket, the journal, Margaret's journal. This belonged to your first victim. She documented everything, the threats, the warnings. The night she realized she was being followed, her suspicions about who wanted her dead and why. Blackwood's face went very still. That proves nothing. It proves motive, combined with testimony from the carriage driver's widow, who's been keeping her own records for 7 years, waiting for someone brave enough to use them, combined with medical reports from Dr. Samuel Chen in London, who examined victims of mining accidents and found injuries inconsistent with the official reports, combined with financial records showing payments from your accounts to local magistrates right before they ruled deaths accidental. She took a breath. We didn't send the evidence to newspapers, Lord Blackwood. We sent it to Scotland Yard, to the fraud division, to investigators who can't be bought off because they don't answer to Parliament. They answer to the Crown. It was mostly a lie. They hadn't had time to do any of that. But Elara was betting everything on the one thing Blackwood couldn't verify in time, whether Scotland Yard had been contacted, whether an investigation had been opened, whether the reach of his corruption extended far enough to stop it. You're bluffing, he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. Am I? You want to take that chance? She stepped closer. See, the beautiful thing about targeting actual investigators instead of journalists? They don't need public opinion, they just need probable cause. And once they start digging, once an official investigation opens, every magistrate you've paid, every politician in your pocket, everyone who's taken your money to look the other way, they all become witnesses. And witnesses flip when they realize the ship is sinking. You don't have the connections. The Duke of Ashford has connections you've never dreamed of. Old family, old money, old favors owed. You think Parliament is the only source of power in England? She was improvising wildly now, building on half-truths and desperate hope. His grandfather was advisor to the king. His uncle sits on the Privy Council. One letter from them to the right people, and your entire corrupt system gets investigated from the top down. Rowan caught on, voice strengthening. I sent that letter 3 days ago, marked urgent, marked confidential, explained everything, named names, including yours. And if you kill us, Elara continued, that just confirms their suspicions. Proves we were right, makes the investigation priority 1 instead of routine inquiry. The room went silent except for the ticking of a grandfather clock that probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Blackwood stared at them both, mind clearly racing through scenarios, calculating odds, trying to determine if this was real or the desperate last gambit of people with no cards left to play. Prove it, he said finally. Show me this letter. Show me proof Scotland Yard is actually investigating. Why would I do that? So you can interfere, destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses before they can testify? Elara shook her head. The investigation is already underway. You're already under scrutiny. The only question now is what you do next. Because if we die here tonight, if we disappear, that investigation accelerates. But if we walk out of here, go home, live quiet lives, and stop making noise, maybe you have time to cover your tracks, destroy evidence, get your story straight. Maybe you survive this. It was a terrible bluff, built on lies and desperation and the slim hope that Blackwood's fear would outweigh his logic. He studied her for what felt like hours. Then he turned to Rowan. Your grandfather is dead. Your uncle barely speaks to you after the scandal 7 years ago. You have no connections worth mentioning. Try me, Rowan said flatly. Kill us and find out. Another silence. The clock ticked. Someone in the hallway coughed. Then Blackwood laughed. Sharp, bitter, genuine. You're either the bravest people I've ever met or the stupidest. I honestly can't tell which. Does it matter? Elara asked. Not really, because here's what I know. Even if you're lying about Scotland Yard, even if this is all elaborate fiction, you've created doubt, made me uncertain, and uncertainty is expensive. Costs time and money and resources I'd rather spend elsewhere. He returned to his desk, slumped into his chair. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave. Take your husband. Take that broken fool on the floor. Go back to your manor. Stop organizing workers. Stop spreading rumors. Stop being problems. And the families willing to testify? Rowan asked. We'll be left alone. For now. provided they also stop being problems. Blackwood's smile was sharp. But understand, this isn't surrender. This is strategic retreat. I'm allowing you to live because killing you costs more than it's worth currently. That equation could change. Probably will change. So enjoy your victory while it lasts. And the mind conditions? Elara pressed. The child labor? The safety violations? Will be addressed. Gradually. To the extent required to avoid official investigation. He waved a hand. I'm not stupid. I know when to adapt. Some reforms will be made, some standards raised, enough to make people think change is happening. Whether it actually does? He shrugged. That's a longer conversation. It wasn't enough. It wasn't even close to enough. But it was something, a crack in the wall, an admission that pressure worked, that resistance had consequences, that absolute power had limits after all. We're taking the evidence with us, Rowan said. No, you're not. Then we've got nothing preventing you from killing us the moment we leave. Blackwood considered this. Fair point, fine. Take your papers, your photographs, your dramatic journal entries. Keep them as insurance. But if they're ever published, if this story ever goes public, if I see so much as a whisper in the newspapers, his voice went cold. There are fates worse than death, Duke. I can make you watch your daughter suffer, can destroy your family name so thoroughly that your ancestors roll in their graves, can ensure the Ashford legacy ends not with dignity, but with scandal so vile that history remembers you as the villain. Understood, Rowan said tightly. Do we have an agreement? Elara looked at Rowan. Rowan looked at Garrett. Garrett managed a weak nod. We have an agreement, Elara said. For now. For now is all any of us have. Blackwood gestured to his men. Untie them, give them horses, escort them to the border of my property. After that, they're on their own. They stumbled out of the Blackwood estate like refugees from a war nobody else knew was happening. Garrett could barely stay on his horse. Rowan rode in grim silence, one hand pressed to his ribs where bruises bloomed purple and yellow. Elara's hands shook on the reins so badly she could barely steer. They made it half a mile before Rowan pulled up short. What you did back there? That was insane. It worked. Did it? Or did we just trade one trap for another? He turned to look at her properly. We don't have an investigation. We don't have Scotland Yard. We don't have any of the things you claimed. I know. So what happens when Blackwood figures that out? When he realizes we were bluffing? Then we make it real, Elara said. We actually do the thing I said we'd already done. We contact investigators. We build the case properly. We use this breathing room he just gave us to actually create the threat I pretended existed. Rowan stared at her. You're actually serious? Completely. He's right about one thing. Uncertainty is expensive. So we keep him uncertain. Keep him looking over his shoulder. Keep him too busy covering his tracks to focus on us. And meanwhile, we do exactly what Margaret was trying to do 7 years ago. We build a case too solid to ignore. That could take months, years. So it takes years. We've got time now. He gave us that. We use it. Garrett let out a weak laugh that turned into a cough. You're both crazy, but I'm in. They rode through the night, reaching Ashford Manor as dawn broke gray and cold over the moors. The gates opened before they arrived. Someone had been watching. Families poured out, faces tight with fear and relief. Catherine and Lydia broke through the crowd and hit Rowan like small cannonballs, nearly knocking him off his horse. He caught them awkwardly, wincing, but held on. You came back, Lydia said into his chest. I promised I would. He looked at Elara over their heads. We both did. The next week passed in exhausted chaos. Families slowly dispersing back to their homes, but different now, organized, connected, knowing they weren't alone. Garrett coordinating information networks, Rowan writing careful letters to contacts he'd abandoned 7 years ago, rebuilding burned bridges. And Elara? She went through Margaret's journal again, properly this time. Reading not just the entries about fear and suspicion, but the ones before, the ones about hope, about love, about a woman who'd believed marriage could be partnership, that privilege meant responsibility, that loving someone meant fighting for what they believed in. She found Rowan in his study late one night, surrounded by papers. There's something I need to know, she said from the doorway. He looked up, exhaustion written in every line of his face. What? The night Margaret died, what actually happened? His jaw clenched. You read the journal. You know what happened. I know what she thought happened. That you were consumed by this investigation. That you'd pulled away from her. That she couldn't live like that anymore. Elara stepped into the room. But what really happened? Because that journal ends with her planning to leave. Not with her dead on the road. Rowan was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I found out they were planning something, the mine owners. Someone tipped me off, a worker who'd overheard conversations. They knew I was getting close to exposing them, and they were going to take Margaret, use her as leverage to make me stop. So you told her to run. I begged her to run, to take the girls and go to her sister's, to hide until I could finish gathering evidence and make it public. Once it was public, they couldn't hurt her without proving I was right. His voice cracked. She thought I was abandoning her, that the investigation mattered more than our family. She left angry, wrote that last journal entry thinking I'd chosen crusading over her. She never knew I was trying to protect her. And the accident? Wasn't an accident. They intercepted her anyway, made it look like she'd lost control of the carriage. But I found evidence later. The driver had been killed first, shot in the back. The horses had been spooked deliberately. They murdered her and made it look accidental. And everyone believed it because why would mine owners target a duchess? What possible motive could there be? Elara sank into a chair. She died thinking you didn't love her. Yes. And you've spent 7 years thinking you got her killed. I did get her killed. No, they killed her. You tried to save her. There's a difference. Is there? Rowan's eyes were red-rimmed, ancient with grief. Because she's still dead. My daughter still grew up without a mother, and I still failed to protect the one person who mattered most. You were trying to protect thousands of people. Workers, families, children, dying in mines. That's not failing. That's just having to make impossible choices. Choices that cost Margaret her life. Choices that might save other people's mothers, other people's wives. Isn't that worth something? He looked at her then, really looked, and something shifted in his face. Not peace, not forgiveness, but maybe the first edge of understanding that grief and guilt and responsibility were more complicated than he'd let himself acknowledge. I don't know how to do this, he said quietly. How to be a husband, a father, a person instead of just survival instinct with a title. You're doing it right now, talking, being honest, letting someone see you're actually human under all that control. Elara leaned forward. Your daughters need that. They need to see you're not made of iron, that you hurt, that you care, that Margaret's death broke you because you loved her, not because you failed some masculine duty to protect. And if I fall apart, then you fall apart, and we pick up the pieces. Together. Because that's how families actually work. Not everyone being strong all the time, but taking turns holding each other up when the weight gets too heavy. Rowan's hand shook, just slightly, just enough. Then he did something Elara had never seen him do. He cried. Not dramatically, not with sound, just tears sliding down his face, while he sat there looking broken and human and real for the first time since she'd met him. She went to him, knelt beside his chair, didn't try to fix it or comfort it or make it better, just sat with him while he grieved properly for the first time in 7 years. Outside, dawn was breaking. Inside, something was healing. The changes started small. Rowan eating breakfast with his daughters instead of alone in his study. Catherine laughing, actually laughing, at something Lydia said. The servants moving less like they were being graded and more like they were just doing their jobs. Elara replaced Miss Thornberry with a younger tutor who believed children should be educated, not trained like performing animals. The girls' lessons became conversations. Their deportment drills became time outdoors. Their perfect precision became messy, genuine learning. Father played chess with me yesterday, Catherine reported one morning, voice filled with wonder. He actually played, and talked about things other than proper etiquette. Did you win? Elara asked. No, but he smiled when I tried an aggressive opening, said I played like Mother used to, reckless but creative. That's good, right? It's the first time he's mentioned Mother without looking like he wants to die. Progress. Painful, slow, but real. Meanwhile, the real work continued. Rowan made contact with a journalist in Edinburgh named Sarah Chen. No relation to the fictional Dr. Chen Elara had invented, but a real person with a reputation for fearless reporting. She listened to their story, examined the evidence, made no promises but didn't dismiss them either. "This is bigger than I can handle alone," she admitted during a secret meeting at a coaching inn halfway between Ashford and Edinburgh. "But I know people, investigators, reformers, people who've been waiting for a case solid enough to actually prosecute. This might be it." "Might be?" Rowan asked. "Won't know until we try. But yeah, I think we've got something." She looked at Elara. "The question is what you're willing to risk. Going public with this, even with Scotland Yard backing us, means years of legal battles, death threats, social ostracization. Your family name dragged through every scandal sheet in England. It'll be ugly." "It's already ugly," Elara said. "Question is whether we hide from that or deal with it." "And you're prepared to deal with it?" "We don't have a choice. Too many people are counting on us now. Too many families have put their faith in the idea that speaking up might actually change something. If we back down now, we prove Blackwood was right, that power wins, truth doesn't matter, and fighting for justice is just a nice story for people stupid enough to believe it." Sarah Chen smiled. "I like you. All right, give me 3 months. I'll build a case so airtight, even Parliament can't ignore it. Meanwhile, you keep your heads down. Don't provoke Blackwood. Don't give him ammunition. Just exist, and trust that sometimes the slow way is the only way that actually works." They trusted. It wasn't easy. Every day, Elara expected Blackwood to renege on their agreement. Every night, Rowan woke from nightmares about Margaret's death. Every moment felt borrowed, temporary, fragile as glass. But slowly, things stabilized. The family's organizing into something that wasn't quite a union, but wasn't quite just friendship either. A network of mutual support, information sharing, collective bargaining power. Mind conditions didn't improve overnight, but they improved incrementally. Child labor didn't end, but it decreased. Safety violations still happened, but they got reported instead of buried. It was nowhere near enough, but it was something, and something was better than the nothing that had existed before. 2 months after their confrontation with Blackwood, an official letter arrived at Ashford Manor, sealed with the mark of the Royal Commission on Industrial Safety. Rowan opened it with shaking hands, read it twice, then looked at Elara with something like disbelief. "They're opening a formal investigation into the Blackwood mines and 3 others, based on evidence submitted by concerned citizens and corroborated by independent medical experts." He laughed, shaky but genuine. "It's real. It's actually happening." Sarah came through. Not just Sarah, Garrett, the families who testified, everyone who refused to stay quiet. He pulled Elara close, kissed the top of her head. You made this happen. We made it happen." "No, you refused to let it not happen. There's a difference." His arms tightened around her. "Margaret tried to do this alone. Thought she had to save the world single-handedly, and it killed her. But you built something bigger than yourself. Made it about community instead of crusade. That's why it's actually working." Elara leaned into him, felt his heartbeat against her cheek, and thought about all the ways this could still fall apart. The investigation could fail. Blackwood could find ways to obstruct. Public opinion could turn against them. But right now, in this moment, they'd done something impossible. They'd made powerful people afraid. They'd given hope to people who'd forgotten what hope felt like. They'd proven that speaking truth to power wasn't suicide. It was just really, really hard. And sometimes, hard was enough. That night, Rowan gathered his family, Elara, Catherine, Lydia, in the drawing room. Not formally, just together. "I need to tell you something," he said, voice rough with emotion, "about your mother, about what really happened." The girls went very still, and Rowan told them everything: the investigation, the threats, Margaret's misunderstanding, his desperate attempt to protect her, the murder disguised as accident, the 7 years of grief and guilt and self-imposed isolation. "I thought if I kept everyone at distance, if I made this house into a fortress, I could keep you safe," he finished. "But all I did was make you prisoners. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you lost your mother. And I'm sorry you essentially lost me too. Lydia was crying. Catherine's face was blank with shock. Did Mother know? Catherine finally asked. That you were trying to protect her? No. She died thinking I'd chosen the investigation over our family. That's my greatest regret, that she never knew the truth. Then we have to make sure people do know, Lydia said fiercely. We have to make sure she didn't die for nothing, that her story actually means something. Rowan looked at his youngest daughter, 8 years old and already understanding what justice meant, and nodded. We will. I promise you that. We'll make sure everyone knows Margaret Ashford died fighting for what was right, and that her death wasn't the end of that fight. It was just the beginning. They sat together as a family for the first time in 7 years. Not perfect, not healed, but honest. And honesty, Elara was learning, was where healing actually started. The investigation made headlines 3 weeks later. Royal Commission examines mine safety after Duchess's campaign ran in papers across England. Elara's name was everywhere suddenly, some articles praising her courage, others suggesting she was a troublemaker disrupting proper social order. Blackwood issued a statement calling the investigation a politically motivated witch hunt. His allies in Parliament tried to quash it, but Sarah Chen's reporting had created too much public interest, too much momentum. The tide was turning, slowly, painfully, but turning. And one morning, Elara woke to find a letter on her breakfast tray. Simple paper. Unsigned. Just a few lines in handwriting she didn't recognize. You don't know me, but I work in the Whitestone mine. My son is 8. Same age as yours, started working before you spoke up. Because of you, he's in school now instead of underground. I know this isn't over. I know we've got a long fight ahead. But I wanted you to know, you made a difference. You saved my boy. Thank you. Elara read it 3 times, throat tight, eyes burning. This was what it was all for. Not headlines, not investigations, not bringing down corrupt mine owners, though that mattered too. But this, one boy who got to be a child instead of a laborer, one mother who didn't have to watch her son die slowly in the dark. One life changed, one family saved. Multiply that by hundreds, by thousands, and maybe, just maybe, they were building something that would outlast all of them. Something Margaret would have been proud of. Something worth every risk they'd taken to make it real. Elara folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer where she'd been keeping all the others. 43 so far. 43 families writing to say thank you, to share what had changed, to tell her their children were in school now instead of dying underground. 43 lives that proved this wasn't just about headlines and investigations. It was about survival, real survival, the kind that meant waking up tomorrow and the day after and believing things could actually get better. She was still sitting there when Rowan found her. Sarah's here, he said from the doorway. With news. Sarah Chen sat in the drawing room looking like she hadn't slept in a week, which, knowing her, she probably hadn't. Paper spilled from her leather case onto the floor. Her hair had escaped its pins. But her eyes were bright with something that might have been triumph or might have been exhaustion so complete it circled back to energy. The commission released its preliminary findings, she said without preamble. 42 safety violations at Blackwood Mines alone. Evidence of systematic negligence. Documentation of bribes paid to inspectors. And she paused for effect. 3 deaths that were ruled accidental but show clear evidence of being preventable with proper safety measures. That's good, right? Elara asked. That's better than good. That's prosecutable. Sarah pulled out a document, official seal and all. The Crown is charging the Blackwood Consortium with criminal negligence. Multiple counts. If convicted, they're looking at massive fines, potential prison time for executives, and forced sale of the mining operations to owners who will actually follow safety regulations. Rowan sat down heavily. They're actually going to face consequences. They are. Because you made it impossible not to. The evidence you gathered, the testimonies you organized, the public pressure, it all added up. Sarah grinned, feral and satisfied. You did it! You actually did it! But Elara knew better than to celebrate yet. What's the timeline? Trial starts in 3 months. It'll be ugly. Blackwood has the best lawyers money can buy. They'll attack every witness, Question every piece of evidence, drag your family name through the mud just to make an example. Sarah's expression sobered. You need to be ready for that. For testimony. For cross-examination. For every dirty secret you've ever had getting aired in open court. I don't have dirty secrets, Elara said. Everyone has something, and they'll find it, or invent it. Sarah looked between them. Last chance to back out. You've already accomplished more than anyone thought possible. No one would blame you for stepping away now. Elara looked at Rowan. Rowan looked back. And something passed between them. Understanding, agreement, the kind of silent communication that came from surviving hell together. We're seeing this through, he said. Both of us, Elara added. Whatever it takes. Sarah nodded like she'd expected nothing less. Then we've got work to do. The next 3 months were brutal in ways Elara hadn't anticipated. Not physically dangerous. Blackwood was too smart to try anything violent now that the spotlight was on him. But emotionally exhausting. Lawyers conducting depositions that felt more like interrogations. Journalists camping outside the manor gates. Society matrons who'd been perfectly polite before suddenly cutting Elara dead at social functions. You've made yourself unmarriageable, one former friend said with false sympathy. No decent family will associate with someone who causes such scandal. Good thing I'm already married then, Elara replied sweetly. But it hurt. She'd expected opposition from mine owners and corrupt officials. Hadn't quite prepared for how much her own social class would turn on her for betraying their interests. Rowan faced his own battles. Old friends refusing to acknowledge him. Business partners pulling out of deals. Whispers that he was destroying the economy, undermining British industry, weakening the empire itself, all because he thought mine workers deserved to not die on the job. They're calling me a traitor, he said one night, staring at yet another letter, dropping his membership from yet another gentleman's club. To my class. To my people. Your people, Elara pointed out, are dying in those mines. These men in their comfortable clubs? They're not your people. They're just people who happen to be born rich, same as you. Doesn't make them family. He looked at her with something like wonder. How are you so certain about what's right, what matters? I'm not certain about anything. She searched for words. I'm just trying to be someone Margaret would have respected, someone your daughters can be proud of, someone I can look at in the mirror without flinching. That's all. That's everything, he said quietly. The trial began on a gray morning in late autumn. The courthouse was packed. Journalists, activists, mine workers in their best clothes, society people coming to watch the spectacle. Elara sat in the front row beside Rowan, hands folded in her lap, spine straight, trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. Nathaniel Blackwood entered with an entourage of lawyers who looked like they charged by the syllable. He caught Elara's eye across the courtroom and smiled, cold, assured, the smile of someone who'd never lost at anything and didn't plan to start now. The prosecutor was a woman named Eleanor Thorne, late 50s, with the kind of face that suggested she'd seen every dirty trick and hadn't been impressed by any of them. She opened with a statement that laid out the case methodically. Safety violations, bribery, deaths that should have been prevented, evidence of systematic corruption. The defense will tell you this is about economics, she said, about maintaining British industrial superiority, about protecting jobs. But it's not about any of that. It's about whether human lives have value, whether workers deserve basic safety, whether those with power and privilege have any responsibility to those who have neither. That's what we're here to determine. Blackwood's lead attorney stood, a man named Sterling who looked like he'd been designed by committee to represent wealth and authority. My client is a businessman, not a murderer. Accidents happen in dangerous industries. That's the nature of mining, of manufacturing, of building the infrastructure that keeps this nation strong. The prosecution wants to criminalize normal business operations, set a precedent that would cripple industry, make it impossible to compete globally. Is that really what we want? To sacrifice British prosperity on the altar of misplaced sentiment? Back and forth they went, framing the battle. Not as justice versus corruption, but as progress versus stability. Profit versus safety. Pragmatism versus idealism. The first week was mostly procedural, evidence being entered, objections being argued, the slow machinery of law grinding forward. But the second week they started calling witnesses. First up, Former mine workers telling their stories. A man who'd lost his son to a collapsed tunnel. A woman whose husband died of black lung at 35. A boy of 14 who'd started working underground at 9 and already had lungs like breathing through wet cloth. Sterling cross-examined them ruthlessly. You accepted employment knowing the dangers, didn't you? You were paid for your work, correct? Did anyone force you to work in the mines? Turning their poverty into consent, their desperation into choice, their survival into agreement. Elara's hands clenched so hard her nails drew blood. Then Sarah Chen took the stand, not as a witness exactly, but as an expert on labor practices. She walked the court through her investigation, the patterns she'd found. The evidence trail showing systematic negligence wasn't accidental, it was policy. These deaths weren't unfortunate tragedies, she stated clearly. They were predictable outcomes of choices made by executives who valued profit over safety. When you cut corners on tunnel supports, people die. When you ignore ventilation requirements, people get black lung. When you employ children too small to understand danger, they have accidents. This isn't complicated. It's cause and effect. Sterling stood. Miss Chen, you're a journalist, not an engineer, not a mining expert, not qualified to make determinations about industrial safety. Isn't that correct? I'm qualified to recognize patterns, to analyze data, to connect dots between policy decisions and human casualties. You don't need an engineering degree to see that children dying in mines is wrong. Wrong according to your personal moral code, not according to law or economic necessity. If law and economic necessity require children to die, then law and economic necessity are what's wrong. The courtroom erupted. The judge called for order. Sterling moved to have Sarah's testimony stricken as emotional rather than factual. The judge denied it. The witness may continue. Third week, they called Rowan. He took the stand looking like he'd aged a decade in the past 3 months, but his voice was steady when he swore the oath. The prosecutor walked him through his original investigation 7 years ago. The evidence he'd gathered, the resistance he'd faced, the threats against his family. And your wife, Margaret Ashford, what happened to her? She died. Carriage accident. Officially. Rowan's jaw tightened. But I found evidence later suggesting it wasn't accidental, that she'd been targeted because of my investigation into the mines. Objection. Sterling was on his feet. Speculation. No proof of causation. Sustained, the judge ruled. The witness will stick to facts, not suspicions. But the seed was planted. The jury had heard it. And when Sterling cross-examined, trying to paint Rowan as a bitter man inventing conspiracy theories to justify his own failures, it only made him more sympathetic. Your Grace, isn't it true you abandoned your investigation 7 years ago? That you gave up? Yes. Because you realized you were wrong, that there was no corruption. No, because I was threatened, and I believed those threats, and I chose my family's immediate safety over fighting for change. I'm not proud of that choice, but it's the one I made. Yet now you're back, making the same claims, seeking what? Revenge? Attention? Seeking justice for my wife, for the workers who've died since I backed down, for everyone who's suffered because I was too afraid to keep fighting. Rowan looked directly at Sterling. I gave them 7 years of silence. They used it to kill more people. So yeah, I'm back. And this time I'm not stopping. 4th week, they called Elara. She'd been dreading this, rehearsing answers, trying to prepare for questions designed to make her look naive, manipulative, or both. The prosecutor started gentle. Your Grace, when did you first become aware of conditions in the Blackwood mines? Shortly after my marriage. I heard stories from workers' families, saw the effects, widows, orphans, men dying young from lung disease. I couldn't ignore it. So you began investigating? I began asking questions, which led to answers, which led to evidence that these weren't isolated tragedies but systematic failures. And you organized the workers? Coordinated testimony? I helped connect people who wanted to speak up but were afraid to do so alone. Gave them a place to gather, to share their stories, to realize they had power in numbers. Why did you do this? You're a duchess. You could have ignored all of this. Lived comfortably. Why risk yourself? Elara took a breath. Because I read Margaret Ashford's journal, and I saw what happens when good people stay silent. She tried to fight alone and it killed her. I decided if I was going to live in her house, raise her daughters, take her place, then I had to finish what she started. I owed her that much. Then Sterling's turn. Your Grace, you married the Duke for money, didn't you? Your family was bankrupt. This was a financial transaction. Yes. So you're not exactly a disinterested party. You have everything to gain from making your husband look like a hero, from creating dramatic narratives about corruption and murder. I have nothing to gain. My social standing is destroyed, my reputation ruined. Half of society won't speak to me. I'm not doing this for personal benefit. Then why? Because I'll tell you what I think. I think you're a young woman who married above her station and needed to make herself relevant, important. So you created this crusade, cast yourself as the heroine, all for attention. Elara felt rage burning in her chest, but kept her voice level. I did this because children were dying, because workers were being exploited, because people with power were using that power to hurt those without it. If that makes me attention-seeking, fine. I'll take that label. Better than being someone who sees suffering and does nothing. Noble words. But let's talk facts. You claim to have sent evidence to Scotland Yard, to have opened official investigations. But when we checked, no such investigation existed at the time you made those claims. You lied, didn't you? Her stomach dropped. You lied to Nathaniel Blackwood, bluffed, made up an entire investigation to scare him into backing down. Isn't that correct? Yes, I lied to save lives. So you're admitting to fabricating evidence? To making false claims about official investigations? I made claims that later became true, once we had time to actually contact investigators to build the case properly, after you'd already used those false claims to extort my client, to force concessions through deception. Sterling smiled. Tell me, Your Grace, if you'll lie about one thing, why should this court believe anything else you say? The courtroom buzzed. The judge called for order again, and Elara sat there feeling like she'd just lost the entire case with her honesty. But then Eleanor Thorne stood for redirect. Your Grace, when you told that lie, when you claimed an investigation existed that didn't yet, were you trying to protect people? Yes. Did you believe your life was in danger, that others were in danger? Yes, absolutely. And everything you claimed in that bluff, the evidence, the testimonies, the case you said existed, did all of that actually come to exist? Did you make it real? Yes, we did. So you lied in a moment of crisis to buy time. Then you used that time to make the lie into truth. That's not fabrication, that's strategy. Thorne looked at the jury. And frankly, if more people had the courage to bluff that effectively against those who threatened them, we'd have far fewer victims. The trial dragged on for 6 weeks total. Witnesses and counter-witnesses. Evidence and counter-evidence. The slow grinding process of justice trying to determine truth from 1,000 competing perspectives. Finally, closing arguments. Sterling painted Blackwood as a visionary businessman maintaining British prosperity against unreasonable demands. Painted the workers as unfortunate casualties of necessary industry. Painted Elara and Rowan as bitter crusaders manufacturing scandals. Eleanor Thorne told a simpler story. 42 safety violations, documented bribes, preventable deaths. That's not economic necessity. That's negligence. That's choosing profit over human life. That's what we're here to judge. Not whether mining is dangerous, of course it is, but whether those dangers should be minimized or exploited. Whether those with power should protect the vulnerable or prey on them. That's the question. And the evidence makes the answer clear. The jury deliberated for 3 days. 3 days of waiting, of pacing, of Catherine asking if they were going to lose and Lydia insisting they couldn't lose because they were right, as if rightness guaranteed victory. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, word came. Verdict reached. They filed back into the courtroom. Elara, Rowan, Sarah, Thomas Garrett, representatives from the mining families, packed the benches, held their collective breath. The jury foreman stood. In the matter of Crown versus Blackwood Mining Consortium, Elara's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack ribs. We find the defendants guilty. The courtroom exploded. Cheering from the workers' section, gasps from society people, Blackwood's face going white, then red, then white again as the full implications hit. The judge banged her gavel for order. The defendants are found guilty on 38 counts of criminal negligence, 12 counts of bribery, and 9 counts of willful endangerment resulting in death. Sentencing will be scheduled for... But Elara stopped hearing the details. Because guilty. They'd said guilty. After everything, after all the lies and threats and desperate gambles, they'd won. Not completely, not perfectly. Blackwood's lawyers would appeal. The sentence might be reduced. Justice was never as clean as you wanted it to be. But they'd won the part that mattered. They'd proven that power wasn't absolute, that speaking truth could actually change things, that one person, or 2, or 50, could stand up and make it matter. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Workers, families, journalists, people who'd been following the trial, invested in the outcome. When Elara and Rowan emerged, someone started clapping, then another, then a whole wave of applause rolling through the crowd. "You did it," a woman called out. "You saved us." "We didn't save anyone," Elara called back. "We just proved that you deserved saving, that your lives matter. That's all." But it wasn't all. It was everything. That night, back at Ashford Manor, they had what Rowan called the smallest victory party in history. Just family. Him, Elara, Catherine, Lydia, Mrs. Brennan hovering with tea, Thomas Garrett sneaking in through the kitchen because someone had to represent the actual workers. "To Margaret," Rowan said, raising a glass. "Who started this fight? Who died for it? Who we're still fighting for?" "To Margaret," they echoed. Catherine, emboldened by the day's victory, asked the question she'd been holding for weeks. "Will you tell us about her? Really tell us? Not the sanitized version, the real person." Rowan looked at Elara. Elara nodded encouragement. "She was stubborn," he started. "Impossibly stubborn. Once she decided something was right, she wouldn't let it go. Drove me crazy. Still does. In memory." He smiled, sad but genuine. "She laughed too loud for a duchess, made terrible puns, had this way of seeing through people's pretensions that made everyone uncomfortable, including me." "She sounds wonderful," Lydia said. She was. And she was flawed, made mistakes, could be self-righteous. Thought she had to save the world single-handedly instead of asking for help. He looked at Elara. "She would have liked you, would have appreciated that you learned from her mistakes instead of repeating them." "I don't know about that," Elara said. "I repeated plenty of them. But you survived them. That's the difference." They talked late into the night, stories about Margaret mixing with stories about the trial, about the future, about what came next. Because winning wasn't ending. It was just the start of different work, harder work in some ways. The appeals would take years. Implementation of new safety standards would be slow, resisted at every turn. Other mine owners would fight to avoid Blackwood's fate. This victory was one battle in a war that would outlast all of them. But they'd proven it could be fought, that it was worth fighting. Over the following months, changes rippled out. The Blackwood mines were sold to new owners who, under intense scrutiny, actually implemented safety measures. Child labor didn't end completely, but it decreased dramatically. Working conditions improved incrementally. Not enough, never enough, but better than before. More importantly, workers started organizing, not just in mines, but in factories, mills, dockyards, taking inspiration from what had happened at Blackwood, realizing that collective action could force change even when individual voices got silenced. Elara and Rowan became somewhat infamous, champions to some, troublemakers to others. They received death threats alongside thank you letters, got blacklisted from society functions while being invited to speak at labor organizing events. "We're social pariahs," Rowan observed one morning, reading yet another column condemning them. "Good," Elara replied. "I was never that comfortable with society anyway." What she was comfortable with, being a mother to Catherine and Lydia in ways that actually mattered, teaching them that privilege meant responsibility, that comfort shouldn't require someone else's suffering, that speaking up was harder than staying silent but infinitely more worthwhile. Watching them grow into young women who asked questions instead of just following rules, who saw injustice and wanted to fix it, who loved fiercely and fought harder and refused to accept that this is how things are meant this is how things must stay. They're going to be formidable, Sarah Chen said during one visit, watching the girls debate political theory with Thomas Garrett. Terrifying, really. In the best way. That's the goal, Elara agreed. 2 years after the trial, on the anniversary of Margaret's death, they held a ceremony. Not at her grave, that was private, family only, but at the site where her carriage had gone off the road. They erected a memorial. Simple stone with an inscription Rowan and Elara had written together. Margaret Ashford, who died fighting for justice, who proved that caring is not weakness, who inspired a movement she never lived to see. 1804 to 1819. Representatives from mining families came, workers who'd benefited from the reforms, activists carrying on the work, journalists documenting the legacy. Rowan spoke, voice rough but steady. My wife believed that those with power had an obligation to those without it, that turning away from suffering was its own kind of violence, that silence in the face of injustice made you complicit. She paid for those beliefs with her life, but she was right, about all of it, and we're still proving her right, every day, every reform, every life saved. That's her legacy, not tragedy, triumph. Well, later, when the crowd had dispersed and it was just family again, Catherine placed flowers at the memorial. I wish I remembered her better. You were so young, Rowan said gently. I remember the songs, Lydia offered, the ones she used to make up, about the horses and the weather and silly things. She'd have loved that you remember those. Rowan pulled his daughters close. She'd be proud of you both, of the women you're becoming, of how you're choosing to use your privilege. We learned from you, Catherine said, from both of you. You learned from her, Elara corrected. We're just following the path she cleared. They stood there as afternoon turned to evening, honoring a woman who died trying to change the world and succeeded more than she'd ever known. That night, alone in the chambers that had once felt so cold and impersonal, Elara and Rowan lay tangled together in the darkness. Do you ever regret it? He asked quietly. Marrying me? Getting dragged into all this? Elara considered. I regret that we met through necessity instead of choice, that our marriage started as transaction, that you felt you had to buy a wife instead of finding a partner. She turned to face him. But I don't regret what we built from that, what we became, how we turned duty into something real. Love? Is that what this is? She smiled. I guess it must be, since I can't imagine being anywhere else, with anyone else, fighting any other fight. That's not particularly romantic. No, but it's honest, and I think honest is better than romantic. He kissed her then, slow, deep, the kind of kiss that had nothing to do with duty and everything to do with choosing each other daily, hourly, in all the small moments that added up to a life. I love you, he said against her mouth. Probably have for longer than I was willing to admit. Definitely more than I deserve. You deserve everything, Elara replied. And so do I. That's what Margaret taught us. That everyone deserves safety, dignity, the chance to live without fear. Not just the wealthy, not just the powerful. Everyone. When did you get so wise? When I married a man who'd forgotten what he was fighting for and had to remind him. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other. Two people who'd started as strangers and become something neither had expected, partners in the truest sense. Not just in marriage, but in purpose. In understanding that love wasn't just romance and passion, but showing up for each other when things got hard. Choosing each other when walking away would have been easier, building something worth more than either of them individually. 5 years after the trial, Catherine turned 17. She announced at dinner that she wanted to study law. I want to prosecute cases like Mother's, she said. Make sure people like the Blackwoods can't hide behind expensive lawyers and corrupt systems. Someone has to keep fighting. That'll make you even more unmarriageable, Rowan warned, but his eyes were proud. Good. I'd rather change laws than plan tea parties. Lydia, now 13, had different plans. I want to write, like Sarah Chen. Tell stories about people no one else thinks are important. Make people care about things they'd rather ignore. You'll both be magnificent, Elara said, and probably give your father and me constant heart attacks, but magnificently. Looking at them, these girls who'd survived loss and reinvented themselves, who'd learned to care deeply instead of hiding safely, Elara felt something settle in her chest. Not contentment exactly, more like purpose fulfilled. This was what they'd fought for, not just reform, not just justice, but this. The next generation learning to do better, to care more, to refuse to accept suffering as inevitable. Margaret's legacy living on in her daughters. The work continued, would always continue. There would always be another Blackwood, another corrupt system, another fight that seemed impossible until someone made it possible. But they'd proven it could be done. That ordinary people refusing to stay silent could topple power that seemed absolute. The caring wasn't weakness, it was the strongest thing there was. 10 years after that first desperate bargain sealed in shadows, Elara stood at the window of chambers that had become home, watched the sun rise over moors that had seemed so hostile once and now felt like freedom. Behind her, Rowan still slept. Downstairs, Catherine and Lydia argued about something, probably politics, always politics with those two. In the kitchen, staff moved with easy familiarity instead of fear. Through the grounds, workers maintained gardens they actually took pride in because they were paid fairly and treated with dignity. And somewhere out there in mines and factories across England, reforms continued. Slowly, imperfectly, but real. Because one woman had refused to stay quiet, and another had refused to let her story end with tragedy. Because sometimes the only way through was together. And sometimes the fights you couldn't win alone became the victories that changed everything. Because love, real love, earned love, wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic rescues. It was about showing up, day after day, for each other, for the work, for the belief that the world could be better, and you had a responsibility to make it so. Elara thought about Margaret, about the journal that had started everything, about a woman who died thinking she failed and never knowing how completely she'd succeeded. "Thank you," she whispered to the dawn, "for being brave enough to try, for leaving breadcrumbs for someone else to follow, for proving that even when you lose, you can still win. Eventually, if someone cares enough to finish what you started." The sun broke fully over the horizon, painting everything gold. A new day. A better day. One more day in the long fight toward justice. And Elara Ashford, once a girl sold to save her family, now a woman who'd saved herself and countless others, turned from the window to face it. Ready, willing, unbreakable. Because that's what survivors did. They survived. And then they thrived. And then they made sure others got the chance to do the same. One day. One fight. One victory at a time. Until the world looked less like Blackwood's vision and more like Margaret's dream. Until privilege meant responsibility and power meant protection, and everyone got to live without fear. That was the legacy. Not duty, not survival, but love, transformed into action. And action transformed into change. And change rippling out across generations.